Public Policy Institute. But beyond that, we have representation from Uganda People's Congress. We also have representation from SEDU. We also have representation from Transparency International, Uganda. I'm also seeing representation from National NGO Forum. I'm also seeing representation from Center for Basic Research. We have media as well. So far, I'm seeing PML, the online version. I'm seeing Daily Monitor that has also joined us. We expect more to join. As people come in, I'll be recognizing, including those that are virtually joining and tuning in. So without much ado, allow me to welcome first Emmanuel Chitamereke from the Executive Director from Public Policy Institute. Okay, I've been signaled that I make it the other way around. Allow me to welcome the Executive Director of Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring, Henry Muguzi, to officially welcome us and open the meeting. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Felix, and distinguished guests from representatives of civil society, representatives of government institutions here present, representatives of the media, our esteemed online audience, I salute you all. This morning, we have been awakened to the news that the succession bill has been passed. And when we talk matters succession, some people are quick to jump at political succession. This is a social succession, a bill that guides you on how to develop your will as parents, as you prepare to depart this world. And of course, the other interesting thing is that the protagonists for the rest of the speaker have been advised to cease fire or told to do so. But today, this morning, we gather here at the invitation of ACFIM and PPI to welcome you and invite you to participate in an important discourse, a discourse that places a reality check on the 2021 elections just concluded. The aim is to agree on how we can find a way forward. As you learn, you will agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, the countrymen, and the other stakeholders. As a country, we are recovering from an election that can be characterized as one of the most violent, but also most expensive that the country has ever seen. The violence that preceded the elections, including the wanton arrests, the opposition candidates and their supporters being put away or confronted with the tear gas, but also the abductions that came thereafter. Of course, there was also the issue of indiscriminate shooting, where we had a raft of straw bullets that put out of action over 60 citizens. Many political actors were incarcerated, and some of them remain so. But also civil society activists were not spared. We remember the deportation of international experts that were working on elections. There was a colleague from IFES the EU advice on elections, and many others, okay? But of course, on election, we also remember the banning of a civil society outfit in EU, but also the freezing of bank accounts of prominent civil society organizations, National NGO Forum and Uganda Women's Network, the total internet blackout that we saw, but also the arrest of civil society domestic election observers on election day who were detained for 3 days. And so these are things that happened with our election. And so we gather here today to cast a spotlight on how the election, to examine, to interrogate how the Electoral Commission administered and managed the 2021 elections amidst the global pandemic that seemed to pose a challenge that Uganda had not seen before, and how that impacted on the political competition and consensus building. We also want to interrogate the commercialization of elections, as we saw, that resulted into excessive spending that today places us in a situation where we have more former candidates that are financially battered, shattered, tattered, and tattooed. I can tell you for a fact that Uganda faces a situation of having legislators that are hungrier than any other legislators we have ever had. But also this happens is the same case at other electoral levels. Whether they succeeded or they lost the election, they are in a very sorry financial state. The participation and the contribution of civic actors towards the credibility of 2021 elections, but also going forward, 2026 is one thing, again, we want to interrogate and agree as a country on how we chart forward. And therefore, allow me to invite you today to a journey that should start a discourse on how we want our country, on what kind of democratization process we want to embark on, and the destination we want our country to aim at. Without much ado, allow me to stop there and invite my co-host, Emmanuel Kitamilike, who should then set us on the journey towards what we have been looking out today. Emmanuel. Thank you.
Can I have the presentation on? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. That's better. Thank you so much. My name is Emmanuel Kitamirike, Associate Director at the Public Policy Institute. And before I go into the presentation, I also want to take the opportunity to welcome you to this event, a post-election reflection event, where we want to analyze and try to make sense of how the 2021 elections were conducted. So I have a short presentation that I'm going to run you through in about 10 or so minutes to open up us to this conversation. Next slide. Just as Henry said, the 2021 elections were kind of different from the other elections that we have had. Some of the reasons he has given, talked about violence and others, but I want to speak about two in addition to that. I think the whole idea of having elections amidst a pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, was unprecedented if you remember, there was a lot of debate whether we could actually or we should have these elections. And eventually a decision was taken to have these elections. But we also need to take cognizance of the interruptions that were occasioned by this pandemic. You know that elections are about human-to-human interactions. And you remember the standard operating procedures that the EC put forward, and they were clearly advising political candidates to actually use media, social and mainstream media, to be able to conduct their campaigns. The other aspect, can I have my presentation? Yes. Next slide. Yes. So the other aspect about the elections that Enwe didn't talk about, which I think is unprecedented, is the fact that for the first time, we saw hundreds of politicians emerging from the creative industry, the arts and pop culture. I think that is, for me, is an important point that we want to reflect on, from the presidential candidate, Bobi Wine, to so many parliamentary candidates and local council candidates emerged from the creative industry. And I'm hoping that in today's reflection, we look at what this means, what this meant for the electoral process, but what it means for the political culture in this country. Because I think, in my own view, it is just unfolding. I think that we're going to have to see non-traditional sectors like the art and pop culture producing politicians. And we need to ask ourselves, why is this so? Previously, we were seeing musicians accompanying politicians to campaigns. And this time they said no. But if I was able to sing for Honorable Amelia Chambade to win, can't I really replace her? And they came up and emerged and took up the space. Many of them jokingly, and then they became successful. Now they are legislators and administrators. What does that mean for governance, for democracy, for service delivery? Next slide, please. So, more specifically, as Enre said, we'll be interrogating those three things. The aspect of how the Electoral Commission administered and managed the 2021 elections amidst the pandemic, but more importantly, how did that influence or affect political competition? Okay? I think that is an important point for reflection. Then we talked about commercialization, then the contribution of civic actors. But at the end of the day, for us as the conveners of this space, we're more interested in what can we pick from this conversation that can inform our programming, but also on which basis we can be able to engage different actors as we look ahead to 2026, which is not far next. So I'm going to run through you some basic statistics, and these are really statistics that came out of the elections. I'm looking forward to the keynote address to break down what does this mean for us. And the first one is that those are political parties that participated in these elections. And the other side are the number of candidates that these parties were able to front. I think what we can be able to note in there, next slide, is that out of the 26 registered political parties, more than half of the political parties, 53.8, were able to have representatives nominated to positions in the 2021 polls. However, the highest number of candidates were nominated nominated on independent tickets, representing 50.96%. I think for me, the point here is you have 26 registered political parties. You have about 50% of them being able to present candidates. Then I'm going to ask you, if you're a political party and you're not presenting candidates, then why are you a political institution, organization? And why should you exist? And I think these are the discussions that we need to have and ask ourselves, because in my understanding is that a political party is constituted to really win or retain political power. And if you're not participating in political processes, then the question is, why do you exist as a political institution? So I hope that the keynote, but also in the discussions that we're going to have, we can be able to into on that. Presentation, please. Next. Now this is, oh, I cannot really see properly. Henry, let me have my laptop. Yeah, so again, from the Electoral Commission, EC tells us that 18.1 million were registered voters, 34,684 polling stations. And what I'm picking from this mainly for our consumption is to look at one, the number of invalid votes, almost 400,000 votes were invalid. Two is to also look at the voter turnout, which was 59.3%. And then if you run to the next slide, we try to compare the 2021 elections with the other polls. For instance, if you specifically look at the voter turnout, 59.3% of voters turned up for the elections. This is compared to 67.6% for 2016 and 59.2% for 2011. There are scenarios here. There are people who will argue that, you know, we had COVID, and because of the pandemic, there are many people who turned away from the electoral process. Some will argue about the violence that happened before the elections. I think the essence here is for us to dig deep and try to give meaning to what these statistics mean. But also from the Electoral Commission, results of 83 polling stations with 54,357 registered voters were not included in the final tally. And the EC gives, these are reasons from the Electoral Commission, gives a number of reasons why these were not included. And I think for me, these reasons should also form a basis for us to interrogate. There were allegations of ballot stuffing from these polling stations, the 83. Now, you don't know how many, what happened elsewhere, but there were also grabbing of polling materials during the polling and tallying process, someone grabbing materials and disappearing with the materials. DRR forms were missing in the results envelopes and the metallic black box. In some instances, total votes cast exceeded the number of registered voters for certain polling stations, and this is for the 83. And there were also acts of hooliganism and violence during the counting process. And for me, the question is, how big, to what extent did these reasons manifest themselves elsewhere in the other polling stations that constituted the results of the final tally? Next, we look at the performance distribution of direct elected MPs in the 2021 general elections by gender and political parties. We had 353 constituencies. And out of these constituencies, we see that NRM took the lion's share at 219, and the others were shared amongst the other political parties. What is maybe interesting here is the performance of the National Unity Platform Party. Remember that it was hardly 6 months of registration before they participated in these polls. So getting 43 seats, I think, was a very good performance for a young political party. Next is performance distribution of district woman member of parliament by political party. We had 146 districts that participated in these elections. And out of these, the NRM took 104, which is again a lion's share of the seats, and the others were shared. Next, we look at the political party performance of direct parliamentary seats in 2016 compared to 2021. Who gained, who lost? I'm running through these statistics so there can be a basis for the conversations that we are going to have. Democratic Party lost 5 seats in 2021. FDC lost 4 seats. The Independents gained 6 seats. They have now 50 seats. Jema gained 1 seat. You remember very well that Honorable Asman won a by-election. So at the time of the general elections, Jema didn't have a seat. NRM added on 20 seats in 2021. I talked about the inter-platform, which has 43 direct seats. But we also have People's Progressive Party that gained a seat, and also UPC lost 2 seats. That makes a total of 353 seats. What was the distribution of nominated candidates versus elected candidates by political party? We specifically look at how political parties performed. Number of candidates nominated, number of candidates that emerged successful at the end of the day. The Alliance for National Transformation, many of us expected that they were going to perform better than the results that emerged at the end of the day. But out of the 101 nominated candidates, they were unable to get any seat. DPE 114 got 9, FDC 254 got 31, independents. Most of the candidates at parliamentary level, direct seats, were nominated under the independent ticket. And at the end of the day, they were able to garner 68 seats. But what is interesting here is the NRM. NRM fielded 431 seats, and they were able to get 323 seats. I think that shows you your chances of getting into parliament are much more higher if you contest under the NRM, as the results show. So at the end of the day, 2,449 candidates were nominated for parliament, and 499 seats. The other seats, to make up a parliament of 529, are seats that are occupied by special interest groups. The army, the youth, the women, the workers, and recently the elderly that are joining this 11th parliament. So my essence to splash through these statistics from the Electoral Commission is to inform our conversation I am hoping that the keynote address that is following suit will dig deep into what this means, or what this meant and what this will mean going forward as we move 2026. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel Chitamerike, the Executive Director of Public Policy Institute, and also Henry Muguzi for the welcome remarks. There's something before I call the keynote speaker, I need to bring to your attention that Uganda is among the 13 countries that has been able to hold elections during the COVID-19 pandemic. For purposes of information, those other countries are Togo, Burundi, Malawi, Seychelles, Guinea, Tanzania, our neighbor here, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Niger, Central African Republic, and Congo Brazzaville. So I'm sure this discussion is not just unique to Uganda. What I agree is that I think the elections of 2021 were quite unprecedented for very many reasons. Allow me at this juncture to invite the keynote speaker, who is going to set the stage for the conversation that should continue thereafter. He is representing the Executive Director of Center for Basic Research. He is a social scientist, a researcher, a man in his own right, has published very many journals and publications. He has in-depth knowledge concerning political party financing. So this is his area, and I can guarantee you that he should be able to really tickle us. That is John Senkumba. I welcome you to please take us thereafter from here.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is a significant historical event we are doing, reflecting on an experience which is still very live in our memories. The lawyers have a concept of sub judice, that you don't talk about something that is completely over. But here we are reflecting on something which is not completely over because of all the happenings around us, which you are very much aware about. So, irrespective of that concept, we want to make some reflections. And these are reflections that are going to guide action, subsequent action, as we maybe prepare much earlier this time for the 2026 elections. This 2021 elections, ladies and gentlemen, has been the fourth under a multi-party political system. You remember that before that, we had a series of elections since the NRM ascended to power. When we were reflecting on how far we have come to where we are today, we discovered that there was a time up to 1996 when all the elections that were conducted at that time were managed by the NRM Secretariat. So you can see how far we have come. The NRM Secretariat managed elections. There was no electoral commission. The interim electoral commission came in when we were trying to organize, to elect members of the Constituent Assembly to debate the draft constitution. So before that, we had elections, and the Center for Basic Research has written about those elections and some of the very significant happenings around that time. Maybe let me begin by saying that it would be overly ambitious to expect a perfect election, at least in the Ugandan case. There are bound to be all these imperfections we are seeing. Some of them we have become accustomed to them as our own way of having our own elections. You remember there was also a time when they were saying that the movement system was a unique contrivance by the Ugandan state, that it was our own unique rendering of what democracy would be about. So, with each subsequent election we've had, there has been, and this you need to accept, whether you like it or not, some cumulative progress and improvement each time we hold an election. So despite these imperfections, we need to observe that each time an election has been held, some improvement from the previous one has been noted on several counts. But there are still serious concerns on how free and fair the elections we have recently had have been, and even the elections we've had before. So, in the context of the 2021 elections, there are three overarching factors which defined the context in which we had them. First and foremost, there was the COVID-19 pandemic, which affected the campaigning and the subsequent conduct of the elections. But also, more significantly, there was fear occasioned by the heavy military deployment, especially in urban areas. And this had come about because of several things. We had had an event on the 18th and 19th of November the previous year, where there had been unrest in a number of places, following closely on the heels of the arrest of one of the presidential candidates. So that particular event is directly responsible for the heavy deployment, because the state made claims which are not yet substantiated that that particular unrest of 18th and 19th November 2020 was a well-organized plot to overthrow the government by popular insurrection. Of course, you cannot ask about the actual proof of that. The state will say that we had intelligence, that there's something bound to happen. And the heavy deployment around the 2021 elections is directly associated with the state's interpretation that the prior unrest had been orchestrated by a very well-organized underground movement. But the third overarching factor besides COVID and the heavy deployment of security was the heightened anxiety in the country that Uganda was on the precipice of change. Because of the euphoria around the National Unity Platform Party, there came an interpretation, understanding that Uganda was on the precipice of change. That in and of itself meant several things. One of which was that even those people who ordinarily don't come out to vote in normal circumstances say, now this is the time. Let us go all out to vote. And it is a surprise that the turnout as given by Electoral Commission is much lower than what we anticipated, given that euphoria is very much lower than what one would have thought about. But maybe to also say something about the sense of fear and insecurity, we had seen in September and October 2020 primaries for flag bearers for political parties which were more violent than even the national election itself. Actually, after witnessing those primaries in October and September 2020, people thought that the national election would be hell itself. So that one goes back to the other point of why the state deployed or over-deployed heavily in anticipation that something was about to get. Actually, in those elections, people died, but the number is not agreed how many people died. But it is agreed that there was massive violence. And when we look at why the massive violence was left to go ahead, there are also several interpretations, one of which was that the violence was highest in the primaries for the ruling incumbent NRM party. Now, the traditional or conventional police, the Uganda police force, and their claims and counter-claims whether we have a conventional police force, because the line between the demarcation between Uganda's police force and the national army is increasingly being blurred. It is very difficult now to separate the two institutions, which is also something we should reflect on, because there are people in police uniforms who are army men, but there are also policemen who are in army uniforms. But effectively, around the election time, you could not draw a proper distinction between who was a policeman and who was an army man. And if you based on the clothes or the nature of attire they are wearing, you could go wrong, because sometimes what you saw is not what it was. We also see that as in the previous elections, the internet was switched off. And the switching off of the internet was also a security measure. Increasingly, most of the public events in Uganda are being securitized. For those of you who have had a chance to read the National Development Plan 3, you will agree with me that what we have seen so far is little. What we are going to see under NDP 3, of course, you see that Operation Wealth Creation is under the army, and many things have come under the army, but the National Development NDP 3 specifically now establishes it officially that security is going to be the overarching framework. So there is an increasing trend towards securitization, which we should begin reflecting over if we want to reflect about Uganda's future. It is no longer hearsay. It is becoming virtually formal. That is what is happening. Then this time around, we had 11 candidates who included the incumbent, one woman candidate, 2 retired generals, and 7 other candidates, including a 24-year-old youth. The latter became possible, the 24-year-old, it became possible because of the other age limit clause. You know, when they removed the upper one, people said, but if you remove the upper one, why do you leave the lower age limit? So they removed that. That's why we are able to have a 24-year-old person getting the chance to run as the president. Initially, the constitution had also specified the 2-term limit for the presidency, which had also earlier been removed. So in terms of the sanctity and the respect for your 1995 constitution, which constitution, after all, we had, as Ugandans, premised all our hopes about, because we felt that that was a golden opportunity for a national consensus. So whatever national consensus had been arrived at through the 1995 constitution has increasingly been eroded. So as we reflect about the elections that took place, we should seriously reflect about the constitutional framework itself shifting increasingly to go away from what was originally the consensus arrived at that time. So we also see, or we know conventionally, that the police is supposed to be in charge of the national elections. The police is supposed to be in charge for providing security for the national elections. But this time around, because there had been those riots and because there had been that interpretation, we had the army come in mainly to preempt what had happened on the 18th and 19th of November, the previous year. And several things happened, one of which was there was a proper campaign schedule, which candidates ought to have followed. But this campaign schedule was vulgarized and interfered with by the security personnel, claiming two things mainly. One was that they were enforcing the COVID-19 control measures. You remember in the elections before, the interruptions were justified as enforcing the Public Order and Management Act. So if you are quick at drawing parallels or between two things, this time around in 2021, the COVID control measures replaced the Public Order Management Act, and it became a key tool of ensuring that some of the contestants in the poll were not allowed as much freedom as they would have constitutionally been entitled to. I also call upon you to reflect about the impromptu and abrupt cancellation of elections unilaterally in 15 districts, alleging that the level of COVID contagion in those districts was above what would be controllable. No Ugandan raised a finger. No Ugandan asked for what the respective statistics for these 15 districts which had been identified as too dangerous to campaign in. But many were quick to observe that these 15 districts are the very districts where the opposition had its so-called strongholds. They were united, said you can't campaign this, and nobody raised the finger about that. So that is something we need to reflect over. We also need to reflect over the fact that the time allocated to the campaigns was reduced to 64 days. You remember we usually have 4 months, but now 64 days. And those 64 days were now also cut off by other incidences. So the time allowed was very, very limited. And do you know what happened? The electoral laws specify the campaign time in terms of the actual hours you can hold meetings. The people, CBR was involved in election observation, and our observers in the field attended rallies which went as late as midnight in the night. In Chikube and Hoima, there were rallies held at that, and the security institutions looked on, maybe because they felt powerless, because some of the contestants in those particular places where in Uganda you don't resign ministership and presidency to go and contest the position. Maybe it is one of the very important changes we need to put in our electoral laws, because why do you penalize the minister who has used a government vehicle and not penalize the president who has used a chopper to fly to 4 or 5 places in one day? So, in fact, in terms of reflecting, don't we need, isn't it high time that people hand over formally all the offices from the top, and then they go and contest as ordinary mortal Ugandans? Because if you are competing with the president, we asked the commissioner, community affairs in the Uganda police force, why he was not enforcing, why they were not enforcing all the regulations were enforcing on others. He said, but you know, the president gets prerogative on all things. Who am I as a commissioner to deploy my policemen to go and stop the president when he wants to hold a meeting? He has prerogative. So maybe that one sets us reflecting on, is it right and proper for people who have not handed over offices to go and use the advantages of incumbency, while we castigate this same practice with respect to lower level public officers who are serving? Then I want us also to reflect on the fact that there was a directive that the media would be the main form of campaign. But when you reflect on it, the candidates mainly accessed the voters through actual campaign rallies. We were asking one of the candidates in Bugiri about why for Bugiri the media was not being used as heavily as was prescribed, and he was an incumbent MP and said, I think those things operate, those COVID control measures operate in the city in Kampala. For us here in Bugiri, our law with respect to that is entirely different, and people are not putting on masks. It is strange that after the elections, nobody has bothered to cross-check exactly what has happened to the COVID cases we have. They say they have reduced drastically, but not everybody takes that without a pinch of salt. Maybe one thing else we need to reflect over is the fact that COVID-19 was one of the very defining parameters of these elections, but we analyzed the manifestos of the leading parties and the campaign messages when they were interacting with the voters. Almost nothing was said about what were the alternative ways of handling the pandemic. So COVID-19 itself, which was the defining parameter for the elections, was not a serious campaign issue, either in terms of campaign messages or in terms of the manifestos of the people who contested those elections. Now, we should also reflect on whether voter education and civic education has a bearing on the national election event itself. The mainstream voter education for the 2021 elections didn't get off the ground until December 2021. This was through a consortium called the Civic Education Coalition of Uganda, which had effective coverage in 38 districts. So in terms of looking at the figures, which are close to 400,000 of spoiled and invalid votes, these people started the civic education in December 2021 and covered only those 38 districts, which means that if it happened that way, the two main institutions constitutionally mandated to undertake civic education are the Electoral Commission and the Human Rights Commission. And if we look at the amount of money voted for these two functions in these two institutions, you know that they really, it's not even a drop in the ocean of what is required. But even in terms of institutional capability and preparedness to undertake that mandate, Human Rights Commission and the Electoral Commission are not far from prepared. Also, the Electoral Commission sometimes hires civil society organizations and other agencies to undertake civic education. But maybe we could excuse ourselves because there was COVID, everything was behind schedule. Every attempt that was being made was behind schedule, including the late accreditation of people who wanted to observe elections, both from within the country and from outside. I hadn't been known that I thought that the Electoral Commission accredits you just directly like that. I didn't know that there was a lot of vetting behind formally accrediting an actor to observe an election event, because we kept prodding the Electoral Commission to clear us, and they said our details were with the President's office to vet us for participating in the election observation. So I saw that that could have an impact, because voter education should ideally begin the very day the roadmap for the elections is announced, which was December 11th, 2019, I think, when the roadmap was rolled. That's the very day, or even before that, because civic education is supposed to be continuous. It is only voter education that's supposed to come in towards the electoral time itself. So there is all that challenge which needs to be reflected on. But we also discovered, because CBI was an election observer institution, that those so-called invalid votes are not exclusively because of ignorance on the part of those people who do that. We discovered two things which maybe it is in order to share with you. You know, in the absence of the formal organized institutions doing civic education, so many other people intervene and do civic education negatively. So two things happen. One, voters can be approached and told that when you teach that good candidate whom you want, in order for it to be unambiguously clear whom you want, you just close all the others whom you don't want. So that is part of what happens. But in this particular voting, some of the voters who did not believe in the electoral process just deliberately spoiled their votes. We do not have what was going on in their minds, but there was a protest because of the non-belief, having no faith in the electoral process. So there were spoilers who say that let us show that that thing is not. And yet there are also people who believed that the voting will not change anything, that the result was a foregone conclusion. So these people, some of them did not turn up to vote, but some of them, even when they turned up to vote, they led to invalid votes. So there are some challenges around the invalid votes, which does not only need us to blame it on ignorance. Like in the previous elections, the conveyance of election results from the actual polling centers to the subsequent tally centers up to the national level has been a big challenge. So in terms of, we've heard that those ballot results which were not added on the national tallies, some of them had those challenges, but there was also another additional challenge which was not given by Mr. Chitamirike. There was a situation where the Electoral Commission said that some of the ballots came in too late, that they arrived too late from the polling centers. Actually, in the district where I was an observer, in Mayuge, there is a polling center which is nearer in the middle of town, but whose results were taken to the Electoral Commission registrar at midnight, when it is quite near here. Just as you remember in the 2016 elections, some of the polling centers next to the Election Commission offices did not receive their electoral materials until midday. So there are these strange surprises, which one can say that they are premeditated. You can't attribute them to the other ordinary challenges which we go through. So the conveying of the results from, and if a person wanted to audit, it becomes difficult to audit because the declared forms, some of them went missing. So many things happened in between. So actually the voters were saying, for us, we vote and the things are counted well here. Subsequently, on things going up, we do not understand what happens. So one of the things we need to reflect on as a fraternity which has legitimate concern is it possible for a ballot audit system, an audit system of some sort, to be able to be established so that you can validate at the subsequent tiers of conveyance of these results up to when they reach the national level. So far, the situation is so confused and deliberately frustrating. You can't audit Uganda's conveyance system of the ballots from the place where they are counted. And the counting sometimes is not contestable. They count well and the result comes out well. But what happens subsequently is a matter that becomes a mystery. So, in terms of reflection, I attempted, I have a few minutes, so I'm going to do the impossible. I'm presenting a balance sheet now of those elections so that we see where we are high and where we are low. On the positive, we had timely delivery of voting materials. This time, there are not many places complained because you remember Wakisa and Kampala received their voting materials in the afternoon in the 2016 elections, but this time there was no such a complaint. But on the side of the negative, we have some voters who missed registration due to time limits. You remember there was that thing of the 1 million voters and one thing where eligible to vote and they did not get onto the voting thing. So on the time of the positives, we have voter allocation slips, which is the identification of voters and the speeding up the election process itself. But on the negatives, we had heavy military deployment, which scared off some voters from going to the elections. On the side of positive, we have the polling centers opened early. Most of the voting centers opened early. And on the side of negative, we have the counting being slow and ending after dark in most of these centers. But we also had a situation where the biometric machines failed to load in the beginning for about 2-3 hours, almost across the country. So that was a negative. In terms of a positive, we have hand washing materials provided in some of the centers when they are supposed to be provided in all the centers. On the side of the negative, we have most of the voters did not wear face masks to control COVID. In at least the polling centers where I observed in Mayuge, almost the majority of the people who turned up were not putting on the masks, but there had been an instruction that they should not be stopped from voting, which would ideally be a good thing, not to deny them to vote. On the positive, there was immediate counting of the ballots, immediate after the voting. On the negative, we have conveyance of results was slow and difficult to monitor and authenticate. We have on the positive, voter verification machines were faster than the manual identification. But on the negative, we have some voter verification machines failing to load and delaying the process. Then on the positive, we have very minimal violence reported at polling centers. Given what was seen in the primaries, people thought that the actual election would be hell itself, but there was not as much violence as we feared and predicted. Then on the positive, we have results from those so many centers which could not go into the national tally. So if a person ever discovers that his vote did not matter, but he voted, it will be a double tragedy. So that was on the negative. Then on the positive, we have, in terms of parliamentary candidates, some candidates conceded defeat and congratulated winners. On the negative, we have some opposition candidates and campaign agents were arrested and detained in ungazetted places. Also on the positive, we have some incumbents with all the money they deployed were defeated by not so well-known candidates. And we have on the negative, a lot of money was used in the campaigns, and this may have thwarted the will of the people. Of course, money did not matter in all cases. There are people where money was put, but the result came out almost without the consideration of what the money included or meant. We have 52 observer entries accredited to the EC to observe Ugandan elections, which was a positive. But we have, I've told you that the accreditation came very late towards the elections itself. And we also have on the negative that some national and international election observers were not even invited. And the others who applied were denied the chance to do the observation. Then finally, the internet was switched off on polling day and the subsequent days. On the negative, there were some army officers who made public pronouncements indicating that their loyalty to an incumbent, to any winner other than the incumbent, would not be guaranteed. Such should never have happened. Finally, what do we have to say? I think I can say this. Uganda was not adequately prepared at all to conduct free, fair, and transparent polls under COVID. In fact, none other than the president had indicated that it would be insanity to hold an election with a raging pandemic. The circumstances which metamorphosed to change that position which the president had so validly arrived at, Ugandans need to reflect on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John Senkumba, for that detailed keynote address. You have indeed given us points to reflect on. We are slightly past the allocated time, but I'll be able to recoup the time we've lost. Allow me to recognize the presence of Dr. Gerard Suranda, the Secretary General of DP. I think he's here with us, and I've been told that also Honorable Osman Basara has joined us, the President General for JEMA, Justice Party. Okay, I still encourage you to, we have two audiences, the virtual audience and also the physical audience. We are live on a number of feeds, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, for both ACFIM and also for Public Policy Institute, including Civic Space. We are live, and also join us and you can drop your comments or questions on our Twitter, hashtag #ElectoDemocracyG. According to the program, we should be now getting ready for the panel discussions. So in a minute or two, I will be managing that process as well. But just a recap, there have been a number of reflections pointed at us. I need to pick up a few of them that are quite interesting. There's something to do with reflecting on the surge in the number of candidates that have been that contested this time around. We had 11 candidates gunning for the topmost seat, but we also had 2,664 MPs nominated, and out of which almost half of that number came on the independent ticket. Those are questions concerning the internal politics within political parties. Another issue that is worth reflecting on that has been raised, and I'm sure Morrison will comment on it at some point when we convene, the question around the incumbency. I know as the law is of now, it protects the president to enjoy all the privileges that go with the office of the presidency when is in the race. So, but there is a reflection issue for us there, and how do we deal with issues of the incumbency? If it is applying to the topmost office, can it cascade through to the other offices? There are also issues to do with the voter turnout. I know, according to EC, 18 million were registered, of which only 10.7 were able to cast the vote. So there are issues to do with the voter turnout. And I think compared to, as Tamirike did point out, there was a reduction in terms of voter turnout. So those are serious issues to reflect on. But moving forward, we also must reflect on how do we then strengthen democratic participation and governance, learning from the 2021 general elections. I think these are the conversations that we should be having. With much further ado, allow me to now enter into the next phase of the panel of discussions, where we will have, I was expecting 4 participants, but I think we will have 2. Electoral Commission has sent in its regrets. They cannot join us, but they are following us live. Probably they will be responding to some of the questions that come through directly to Electoral Commission. So we can't have Electoral Commissions, and also we cannot have police. They were supposed to join us to answer questions on issues concerning security. I think there are quite many in that area. But that said, we will have at least 2, and they should be able to fill the gap. I will make the first introduction, and as I invite Morrison Rakakamba to take to the podium. Yes, at the podium, please. He is the Chief Executive Officer for Agents for Transformation. It's a think tank on agriculture, environment, and energy policy. But his CV is quite rich. He worked as a Senior Director of Policy at Phoenix International. He has 15 years plus experience in policy, private sector development, and project management. He was once the CEO for Uganda National Chambers of Commerce. Many of you remember him for being the special assistant to the president, responsible for public policy research and information. And I think many of us at that point in time did so much interact with him. He's also a scholar in his own right, and he has a prestige master's in public admin from Harvard University. So Morrison, you're most welcome. It's good to have you. Our other panelist requires also not much introduction. She is a lawyer, a human rights activist. She's also an expert in rule of law and constitutionalism. She has been on the screen many times fighting for the civic space. Allow me to welcome Sarah Birete, who is again the Executive Director for Center for Constitutional Governance. Please join us. Okay, I'll also join the podium because I'll be managing this process as well. For those of you who have just joined us, my name is Felix Kafuma. I'm moderating this entire session, and I work with Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring. And allow me to get this started. I would want to start with Sarah Birete. You were very active in the elections. I remember you very well. So I will ask you an hypothetical question. How would you sum up the 2021 general elections in a minute? Because I have other questions to fire.
Yeah, thank you, moderator, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, both in the physical and the virtual audience. Mr. Moderator, I think a minute is too much short time for such a question, especially given that we need to fill the gaps for the other panelists that are not here. I hope you'll give us reasonable time for engagement. So in summary, I think that the nature and character of the 2021 elections should send us all as a nation to reflect on what are the minimum standards for an exercise to qualify to be called an election. We know that we have electoral laws in this country that are presumed to be sufficient in laying down the minimum standards for an exercise to qualify to be called an election. But if someone went in the detail of those minimum standards, I think that what we participated in as a nation in the period leading to the 2021 elections does not qualify to be called an election. And the answer is very clear and precise. It's found and established in our grand norm, the Constitution of the land. The Constitution mandates in Article 1, Article 61, and several other provisions that Uganda must have regular, free and fair elections. I know that on 3 occasions, the Supreme Court of this country has found the elections in this country wanting and below the required standard of free and fair elections. And this is a record of our Supreme Court of Uganda. But to the extent to which the irregularities happened in the last elections, I think went beyond every citizen's imagination. First, we had the total militarization, as noted by the keynote speaker. I think the first event opening the electoral exercise was exclusion and enfranchisement of young voters, approximately 1.1 million young voters that were intentionally excluded from being given an opportunity to cast their votes by the abnormal Electoral Commission calendar, which was presumed to have regular update, and then they put a clause as if people stop growing in that period and therefore should be able to forego their constitutional rights to choose their leaders. The second was the unfortunate happening of COVID. And the COVID pandemic happened at the very time that the courts outlawed Section 8 of the Public Order Management Act. So at the time we were planning to celebrate that maybe there would be freedom of expression and association and movement for the political opposition in this country, because we know that NRM is never affected by these abuses and excesses. Then COVID happened, and COVID took away a good fraction of fundamental rights and freedoms, especially freedom to associate, freely express yourself, and pass on your information as an intending political leader to impact or be impacted on for the case of voters to be enabled to make an informed choice as who should govern you for the next 5 years. So COVID took away a good range of freedoms. But also we had intentional acts of the military. And of course, the total replacement of police with military. I think it's important to recall that we had a deployment of war-hardened generals to manage elections, especially in areas where the opposition had more support. You had the Lion of Mogadishu, you had the other hardened generals who managed Operation Wembley creation. So we had experts of human rights abuses in charge of security and security organs in this country. And therefore it does not surprise, or it is not surprising as to what we harvested through these deployments, because it was obvious and the intention was clear. Beyond that, we had a total failure of the Electoral Commission, because I think Electoral Commission chose to play a spectator role in the 2021 elections. Yet Article 61 is very clear on the functions of the Electoral Commission. It's unfortunate that they are not here. Maybe at some opportune time, I hope Justice Byabakama will explain to Ugandans why he chose to play a spectator role in the just concluded elections. Because the mandate, you know, when you read Article 61, functions of the Electoral Commission, ensure that regular, free and fair elections are held, organize, conduct and supervise elections and referenda in accordance with the Constitution. I can bet money if anybody ever saw Electoral Commission supervise elections, they thought their function was a tick box kind of exercise. We have a roadmap, we have nominated, we have the register, and that is all that Justice Byabakama was communicating. So that spectator role, of course, took away the opportunity for Ugandans to choose their leaders as per the Constitution of Uganda. I wish to hold it at that.
Thank you so much. And this is where I bring in Morrison. Someone may argue that these elections were largely peaceful, as one of the things that many did comment on, irrespective of the deployment that she has just alluded to. But with all fairness, we don't have VC here, but let me throw in Morrison here. What are your honest views, especially when it comes to how EC managed the entire process amidst the pandemic?
Thank you very much, Felix. I think I start from the point that the keynote friend of mine made, that it's always very difficult to achieve a perfect election. That's why I think the term that describes the process has always been free and fair. But the keynote speaker also mentioned that every other election, we have had improvements, if you will. He stated that, where perhaps we started from, voting in different boxes at the polling station to, a singular box, and many other improvements that have happened over the years. So I think what we should be reflecting on is whether that trajectory towards better elections is happening or we are actually regressing. But I think from the keynote speaker, he mentioned that although we are not at a geometric pace, perhaps we are at an exponential pace towards achieving a truly, free and fair elections. But this was, again, indeed, an election conducted in special circumstances. And Felix, you mentioned that I think 13 countries on the continent held elections during COVID. But perhaps now the perceptual, grandfather of democracy, the United States also held elections amidst the COVID pandemic. So therefore, it takes me to the conclusion of the keynote speaker, which I disagree with, because he mentioned that during COVID as a country, should we have moved on to a decision to actually have elections? And I still do believe, fundamentally, that the decision to go ahead and have elections such that the right to vote, which is, in my view, is a fundamental right and a fundamental freedom in terms of how the country should be governed and who should govern it, is something that, whether in the midst of a crisis or a pandemic, with the exception of a state of emergency, I think it was the right decision to conduct elections. And I was looking at numbers and the comparator in terms of what happened, because if I could pick out countries that held elections and look at the turnout in terms of, did the COVID pandemic actually affect the turnout? If you look at Togo, in the previous election, they had a turnout of 60.9. But during the COVID pandemic, as they did hold election, the turnout was 76.3. If you look at Burundi, the turnout before was 73.4. They did hold an election during COVID, and the turnout emerged 87.7. Malawi, they also did an election, 74 before. This one reduced to 64. Tanzania reduced, I think, quite, because I think they moved from 67 to 50. Uganda moved from 67.6 to 59. So there was a reduction also here in Uganda. But if you look at the COVID cases in those countries that did hold elections during the pandemic, Togo is at 10,244 cases with 109 deaths. Burundi, 2,757 cases, only recorded 6 deaths. Uganda, 40,839, we have 335 deaths. Malawi, 33,111. So if you look at those numbers, but then you have to again bring in other numbers. How about those countries on the continent that were okay and did not hold elections, so they had the freedom to, for example, do extended lockdowns? You look at a country like South Africa, did not do elections during the pandemic, but they have 1.5 million cases of COVID with 52,000 plus deaths. Egypt, 200,000 plus cases. Algeria, over 100,000 cases and 3,000 plus deaths. So when you look at this atlas, if you will, then you realize that actually the decision to move ahead with whatever restrictions that happened was an okay decision. So I wanted to really focus on that. Then two, I think where the Electoral Commission needed to have done some good work is because of COVID, we were supposed to have what you'd call a scientific election that is led by really the media. And I do agree with those who question Electoral Commission's ability to provide, you know, a level ground within the media space, because whereas we are running a free enterprise economy where these radio stations are, most of them are owned by the private people who are supposed to host who they want to host according to what the market determines. But if it's a public case, I think Electoral Commission should have secured a public budget and purchased space. Not just space, but also prime space, because you see, you can secure space on NTV, but they put you at 5 a.m. when nobody is watching. So, but you'd want the Electoral Commission to engage in providing really meaningful space procured by public money, where all candidates, no matter which political party, should have had equal time to be able to scientifically engage. So I thought that that was, for me, a major misnomer when it came to how the Electoral Commission managed this access, especially with the restrictions that were sanctioned by COVID. But finally, we are reflecting. And we have to know that democracy contracts, sometimes it expands. So it is up to the citizens of Uganda, those who are here, those who are watching virtually, and those who haven't reached, to keep nudging, because elections have ended, but we have to continue trying to perfect them.
Okay. Thank you so much, Morrison. And this brings me to you, Sarah. Okay, because I remember there were a lot of arguments in Parliament, those against and those for, whether should we proceed and hold elections within the current context of COVID. And at some point, even Parliament had to pass guidelines on how political parties should organize and conduct their internal party processes leading up to the elections. My question to you is, how practical or feasible was it, looking at the key tenets when it comes to elections, things to do with participation, inclusion? Given the context of pandemic, was it feasible for us to hold elections? Morrison does argue that yes, it was important we hold elections, and he has benchmarked his argument looking at other countries that also held elections during COVID, and even those that never had elections but had soaring numbers of infections. And if it was feasible, what would we have done differently in this case?
Yeah, thank you very much. I know there was debate at the beginning on whether holding elections would have endangered the lives of Ugandans, given the severity and extent of the pandemic. But since we are reflecting after, we also know that COVID miraculously ended in Uganda after elections. And many people even thought that the Minister of Health was all along exaggerating the extent of the pandemic for political interest. Because as much as some rallies did not follow the COVID guidelines and standard operating procedures, because it was humanly impossible sometimes, given the excitement caused by campaign rallies, and given the need of voters to engage and interact with the people. So there were shortfalls, and some of them, they were bound to happen. But where did COVID go after elections?
It's still here.
To what extent? Do we have a pandemic in Uganda? We have scattered elements of COVID, because a pandemic must have an extent of infection and defect. So I think the missing gap, in my view, and maybe it wasn't also possible because everybody got shocked at where COVID went after elections. Yet we thought the spread would be higher in the areas where campaign rallies did not follow the COVID guidelines. But there was hardly COVID. So I think what we missed was a accurate, prediction of the impact, maybe by the scientists. Maybe it was not even possible because this is a new disease. So also we shouldn't blame them, but we all know that there was no spike in the COVID, numbers after elections. And that's what everybody was scared of. And people were right to be scared. So I think, to me, what was most unfortunate was the harassment, targeted harassment, exaggeration of implementation of COVID guidelines. And we know that a few people are still being killed by ill-trained LDUs in some areas under the guise of observing the curfew. And since I see some members of parliament have walked in, I don't even understand why we still have the curfew in Uganda, given the extent of the pandemic in this country, because of climate and because of demographics of the population.
I'm seeing Morrison protesting one of the arguments you fronted, whether did we have a spike shortly after the elections? Probably, Morrison, you'll come in here, but as you expound on the contested numbers, according to Sarah Birete, there's a whole issue to do with the role of security. And I know they are not here, but can someone argue reliably that the pandemic, and in trying to observe and enforce, it ended up weaponizing the entire process and disfavoring probably the opposition, the opposition and disfavoring the opposition and favoring the incumbent, and probably because there have been those arguments, probably you may dispel that and say there are questions concerning the integrity of the electoral outcomes as a result of the process because of trying to enforce the SOPs.
I have had this argument with my sister quite often on a number of platforms. And I think that, statements like this, when you have people who have lost their relatives or their neighbors, their parents to this virus, and those who are nursing those who haven't recovered. So I think we have to really be very careful and not use the pandemic for political expedience or for making arguments, because my view is that COVID remains a clear and present danger. And I think scientists should interrogate, perhaps, why, for example, our neighbor Kenya is experiencing a surge, if you will, whereas the circumstances in Kenya in terms of our way of life is almost similar. For example, why is it that perhaps in Uganda we could be faring better? We should thank God Almighty in terms of where we are, but also seek, no matter which political persuasion, if you will, to ensure that, these vaccinations happen, everybody gets inoculated, and, we continue these discussions when we're alive. I thought that is extremely very important. Then, on the issue of participation of security, some have argued beyond law and order in electioneering. Should be a concern. I agree with what is it that they knew that we didn't know? Was an insurrection, fomenting to the extent that security had to act? We don't know. So that's why I believe that they should have been here to perhaps give us an inside kitchen point of view in terms of us ordinary people, what we didn't know and they knew, So therefore, they had to act that way. But I think broadly, the place of the military and security forces is something that, should be reflected on. Like this conversation, do we still, for example, require to be having, representatives of the armed forces in our parliament? Are they there as observers, or do they actually vote on certain bills? Those are, for me, very interesting discussions, and I think they should happen on whether, after all these years of trying to really bring the country together beyond the broad-based system, and even an alliance, if you will, because I've always believed that NRM has been managing this country in alliance with other political parties. Like the past 5 years, I think NRM has managed Uganda in concert with the UPC and other political parties. So there has always been, if you will, some form of alliance in management of public affairs, in this country. Then the final piece that I wanted to mention is, the Electoral Commission has gone through a number of reforms. When my friend Sarah Virete, Goodbat Mushabe, Bishop Zach Rusazanirinji, and others were leading it was called the Free Campaign Agenda, where they moved across the country, free and fair campaigns, trying to really deepen the independence of the Electoral Commission. One of the suggestions that the civil society-led agenda was to ensure that the Electoral Commission is led by a justice in this country. So this time we had a justice. So we want to see, did that demand, for example, expand the frontiers of independence of the Electoral Commission? Because that was a major demand of the civil society, the Interreligious Council of Uganda, and other groups. So I think substantively, I want to believe that the challenge of the Electoral Commission, in my view, is the security of tenure. And I've always proposed, and I will continue to propose, I can see the president of JEMA here, who's also a member of parliament, that we should have electoral commissioners whose appointment is perpetual, just like the US Supreme Court, because I believe that they are the custodians of our rights, because the right to vote on how to be governed is so central, to how we progress. Because their security of tenure, if they fear that, somebody is going to wake up on the wrong side of the bed and have them fired, that's a big problem. So I want to suggest that, to deepen their independence, they are appointed for life, so that when they are there, they know that, nobody's threatening their job. 2 is the budget of the Electoral Commission. Who should determine the funding, emoluments, and the budget for this elections process? I think there should be a special appropriation system that allows either a fixed or a flexible budget to be self-evident, such that you don't have a chairperson of the Electoral Commission going to one of the candidates to beg for money, to say, I was meeting one of the candidates because I needed, for the budget to be provided. Then finally, the issue of incumbency, I think, whereas those who argue that incumbency comes with an advantage have logical points, but I still want to believe that if an incumbent is so unpopular, I can tell you, people would vote that incumbent out. And you can see that the attritional rate of members of parliament, especially those who are incumbent. But even at the presidential level, we had it in Malawi. A very serious, incumbent was defeated. I think even in Ghana, some years back, a very, very serious and entrenched incumbent was defeated. Donald Trump in the United States was moving around in Air Force One and all the paraphernalia that goes with the office of the president. But he was defeated. The NRM lost elections in its Mecca, at ground zero in Ruwero, because essentially the NRM agenda was launched in Ruwero. But the NRM, with this electoral commission of ours, that counted the votes, the national resistance movement lost. So I want to believe that in spite of the shenanigans and the challenges that happen, if a politician has not delivered and is grossly unpopular, and with the cheating that people talk about, I can tell you that that incumbent, whether at the presidential level or the constituency level and any other level, can lose elections. And why my brother Wasariwa Asumani, Honorable, won is because, you know, he was delivering for the people. So I thought we needed to balance it up, that in spite of the challenges, I think we can continue to perfect this democracy.
Thank you so much. You remind me the comment the president made in relation to EC. I think he also doesn't trust the EC, apparently. So, but you raised some comments, and I know, Sarah, you'd want to.
No, I just want to clarify one issue. I did not say that COVID does not exist. My point is, there is...
You said it disappeared after elections.
Please, you had your time. Of course, there were no numbers, and I'm referring to statistics of Ministry of Health. I think recently there was a circular by the PS, Ministry of Health, closing the COVID center in Marago. These are facts, but I did not say that COVID did not or does not exist in Uganda.
Fair enough, fair enough. I think you are questioning the numbers within the... Okay, all right. For sure, COVID does exist. But let's first move away from there. Although there are things raised about concerning the... Is it enough to have the judge at the helm of EC to conclude that probably it's one way of having a better managed electoral commission? But there are questions to do with the appointing authority. There are things to do with, of course, the budget is a very genuine concern, and also the issues to do with the incumbency. But as you comment on them briefly, I want to take this discussion towards the keynote address, because the big question in the room is, how do we then move forward? Because we reflect to improve. How do we then move? What should the growing concern now? Yes, that happened. We can take stock of what didn't go right and what went right, but how do we move on from here? And in relation to that, sir, I know for a fact that civic actors around that time also had challenges to meaningfully engage. So how, and also in the aftermath of the elections, I think there are still some tensions here and there, civic actors to meaningfully engage. So how do we, looking at 2026, because it's not very far, do we now meaningfully engage and have a better space of having this conversation, but also improving those shortfalls that we've identified in 2021?
You know, I will start on the issue of, you know, the free and fair campaign and the demand or a wish by the people that the Electoral Commission should be headed by a person who qualifies to be a judge, a high court judge. Of course, the regime has its ways of vulgarizing processes and people's wishes and demands. Then they pick the less independent person, because if you look at, and without due respect to the judiciary, you know, and the character of Justice Biabakama, I know that I'm not the only person maybe who found his conduct as a person presiding over an important process, such as elections of a country, wanting. I know I'm not the only Ugandan. And I will use the experience of civil society. We had a total number of 7 NGOs that were accredited. There were other NGOs unknown to us that were accredited, of course. But out of the ordinary NGOs acting on governance, we had a total of 7 accreditations. You are talking of over 800 applications, and then you accredit 7. And the accreditation came in September, that this is just a few months to elections. And it's not surprising that one of the recommendations we are putting is that accreditation should stop 12 months to elections, so that people have time to do the role that they are accredited to do. Because if you are accredited to do civic education, because we are accredited to do voter education as well as observe electoral processes. So is the time sufficient? Because one of the keynote speakers did talk about the lacking civic education. And maybe voter education, if we can bring the topic closer, because civic education is broad. In this particular election, we did not have voter education. So what caused that? If you are planning an election and you say, I have stopped, let's use the Electoral Commission's own roadmap. They stopped accrediting, updating voters, even beyond the calls of the outcry of citizens. Even Parliament, which says, keep updating as you go on, because people are turning 18. People are turning, at least have a reasonable cutoff, so that you don't defranchise so many people, beyond 1 million. But the Electoral Commission was adamant. There was even a court ruling on voting by people in diaspora and the prisoners. But it was not effected. And there were promises that it will work next time. But ready. The court decision was for this election and other upcoming elections. It was not for postponement until consensus was reached. After, of course, it was also a maneuver, because by the time the court issued that decision, they knew that there were possibilities of making it happen. It was not impossible. So this practice and other events that happened, I know the Constitution provides that the Commission shall be independent and shall not take directives from any authority in Uganda. But then as you go into discussions for a revised roadmap, the first shocking action the Electoral Commission announced is that we consulted at State House, and this is a revised roadmap. Very shocking. And this is the conduct of, my co-panelist Morrison is like saying, it is you who asked for a High Court judge. So you got more than you asked for, because this is a Court of Appeal judge. He could not even consult on BESCs. And he thinks
so is it
consultations at State House means consulting every stakeholder of election. So my point is, we need to have independence beyond words at the Electoral Commission. But we are operating in a political context where even Parliament is a mere symbol. They take decisions that are not respected, and they do not make any effort to reprimand the executive. Parliament has enormous power to ensure that the executive listens to their work and they are able to discharge their oversight function. But you have a Parliament that cannot even suspend debate on a budget to ensure that the executive acts on their earlier decisions. And this is something they are able to do. To bring such a proposal, and I wish to challenge the chairman of GEMA, Honorable Vasari, and my good friend. We know that opposition is outnumbered by the tyrant of the majority, but also at times I think opposition gives up in a few things that they are able to do in the interest of the citizens of Uganda. Parliament passes loan requests, supplementary budgets, I think at least once a month. You have irregular monies you are passing. Even in the first month of approving a budget, you have debates on supplementary budgets. And at times you wonder whether there is already a shortfall in the budget that has just been passed. So I wish we could see efforts, however minor they might seem, of the opposition saying, no, we are boycotting this debate on budgets.
It does not
We
work.
are boycotting, no, I know, but let them walk out so that they are not party to that criminal borrowing that has led our own, I think now our percentage, around 52% against our GDP. We have gone beyond all limits set by financial institutions.
So what should we do? What should we do in respect to
Independence of the commission?
Yes.
It cannot happen if Parliament cannot secure its independence. I don't want really to be here as a dreamer. You have Parliament, which is supposed to do the overall oversight of the executive, oversight of other bodies, because they are supposed to check the executive and judiciary. And you have a subset, because the Electoral Commission is under Ministry of Justice. You have a subset of the executive, and we are demanding independence. When an independent arm of government like Parliament cannot secure their own independence. So I want first to see this independence at Parliament, where it is supposed to be. Then I would be sure that this Parliament can supervise EC. But now who should supervise EC when Parliament cannot do its function?
Okay, fair enough. You don't believe that the Electoral Commission can actually be an independent commission?
When Parliament is not independent.
When Parliament is not yet
Commission
there.
cannot.
You may also argue when judiciary is not yet there. Okay, fair enough. But let's Morrison, I'll come back to you on that one. Concerning the civic space, because it's one of those places you've been very active. How do we then move forward to meaningfully engage and improve 20? Because we also have an obligation as civil society, as civic actors, to improve 2026 elections, starting now. The conversation is not enough, but what else can we do? You've discounted the independence of Electoral Commission, but there are other things we can do.
Thank you very much. I'm not discounting the independence of Electoral Commission, but the Electoral Commission is supposed to be supervised by Parliament. So my push is let Parliament first to recover itself from the capture of the executive. Then we can have other arms or other bodies functioning. You cannot have a supervisory body, which is Parliament, and it's dead. Then you want it to supervise functional entities. Where will that functioning come from? That is my debate really.
Okay.
But on civic space, again, it goes back to Parliament. I know that there is capture of institutions, but I think Parliament should try at all material times to reestablish their independence and be able to function under the presumed separation of powers, the three arms of government. Once you lose Parliament, there is no way you are going to hold anybody else accountable. On civic space, we are suffering because of the malfunctioning of Parliament. And maybe my first call for the new Parliament is, you try to meaningfully investigate the crimes against humanity going on currently in this country. You have a state abducting its citizens. The state has all the powers to arrest whoever citizen is suspected of committing whatever crime. I saw my co-panelist Morrison trying to say that maybe the state knows something we do not know. Come on. All the laws of this country take care of all crimes, be it terrorism, be it insurgency. They are provided for under written laws of this country. The authorities that function under the criminal justice system in this country are provided for. It does not matter what the state has discovered. The state must conduct itself within the laws of the land. There is no exception. Once you have a state, because the situation we are in, and for families who are worried, We have a comparison that we can make with Nigeria. In Nigeria, you have the state and citizens worried of abductions by Boko Haram. We had a similar situation in northern Uganda, where the citizens of northern Uganda were worried about abductions of the LRA. And the state did whatever it needed to do to secure the citizens in northern Uganda, though it took them 20 years. In Nigeria, they are struggling to secure citizens. Once you have a state conducting itself like LRA and Boko Haram, I can assure you nobody's safe. The state must conduct itself in accordance with the criminal justice system in this country.
Okay, they will argue that they are protecting the citizens by trying to remove the wrong elements. And I think that's has been the argument put across.
Within the law.
Of course, the questions are, is it within the law? But Morrison, as we come to the conclusion of this discussion, I think we are doing a lot of pointing what's not going right. But for me, I would want to move us to look at what is possible within our means moving towards 2026. Because the purpose of this conversation is to take stock, reflect, but also propose what is workable. My good friend here doesn't believe that we can have an independent electoral commission. What's your view?
Well, thank you very much. But I think Sarah made quite some statements. Certainly, I think the Ugandan state is not Boko Haram, is not a terrorist state, if you will, because from what Sarah is saying, I think that's extreme. Whereas I agree that there are mistakes that have been done and perhaps continue to be self-evident, I don't think it would be quite fair to describe the Ugandan state as a Boko Haram state. And I do agree, nobody should be abducted. Nobody should be incarcerated beyond the 24 hours as stated in the law. If somebody is suspected of criminality, they should be formally, officially arrested and arraigned. So if you are a parliament and you want to really achieve your space and negotiate and help the country move forward, I think understanding the budget, first of all, engaging with the budget, because it is within the roles of parliament, which is representation, legislation, budgeting, and oversight, where you can pursue the balance of power. And I think our parliament has not had very serious understanding and engagement of the budget. And I think that is where the power lies, where the power is. You asked me, how do we move forward from here? And this is a reflection. So beyond the elements of the state and other formations that we have in the country, there is a missing link. If you have a contestation between the politicians, the civil society, and by the way, I actually think that Parliament should start funding civil society through its appropriation mechanism. It shouldn't be some other extraterrestrial forces funding our civil society. It puts it into some disrepute.
But those forces fund the
Absolutely, but through the Parliament. That's what I think. I think that would be. I think that would be quite interesting. But the point I was trying to make is that there is a missing gap. If you have all these problems, all this mistrust, where is this other legitimate, authority? Because you can have authority without power, but you have the convening authority that would bring together politicians and other people who don't agree on a table. We believed that the Interreligious Council, for example, would be in a position to provide a legitimate space for constructive dialogue that would bring the country together to move forward. But the past election has taught us that because some of the members were openly engaged in partisanship, kind of delegitimized that space. When we had election violence, in Kenya, it is the private sector, because it had the convening power, people with businesses, people with a very serious stake in the country, who told politicians, we don't want you to destroy our country. Let's converge and discuss how we get out of this mess. So I think the missing gap in Uganda, if we ever moved to that, which is very possible, to that place where we can fall off into the ditch as a country, there seems to be a missing, and we have to reflect on it very, very seriously. Because unlike Kenya, we don't have the private sector that has the muscle to actually get the politicians disciplined. The Interreligious Council, because this is a nation under God, it's over 90% religiosity in this country. But we now don't have, it has lost, if you will, the legitimacy to convene and make the politicians or those managing our country, because those managing our country are not only those ones in government, but also those in the opposition and in the politics. So where do we get, and this is a conversation I would want to have, with the guys like Emmanuel and others who are in this. Where is this? Universities and professors who used to lead the conversation and are respected that they would summon and their voices would be heard, no longer act in that way. So I think there is a crisis of a neutral convener with legitimacy in this country to be able to whip the country back in line, unlike most of our neighbors. So I think as we go to 2026, where is that space? If we ever fall off the cliff to a meaningful extent, or if we are about to do so. Finally, we have had an imperfect elections, just like many other countries. But I think it is also time to move forward. I think all political persuasions should take leadership in making sure that every citizen in this country, the 22 million who should be vaccinated, that they get vaccinated. A conversation should happen that should make Uganda get back really get back in the driving seat of the economy. One of the key issues is the signing of the FID, which is the foreign investment decision, so that we can be able to exploit our own resources. Civil society, other political parties, everybody should get involved to know where are we, how are we moving forward to make sure that we exploit those resources. The other aspect, which I believe that beyond the securing our future manifesto, is that we have to reform our foreign service to really focus on commerce. I don't think we still need to have a foreign service that is focused on diplomacy and security only. I think a majority of our civil service should be commercial and investment promoters who are trying to, promote Uganda across the world, but also helping to navigate and bring in this country foreign investment to make sure that we create meaningful and sustainable jobs for our young population and take the country to prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Morrison. Sarah, I want to close this. Do you want to have the last word?
Just quick recommendations.
Yes, thank you.
We need to develop minimum standards of what qualifies to be called an election in this country. We need to demilitarize the electoral process, but as per the presentation by our keynote speaker, now demilitarization is officially captured under NDP 3, and I think Parliament should pay attention to that security has now been mainstreamed, as well as militarization in NDP 3. I think it is a scaring development. EC should start preparing for elections early enough. A conclusion of 2021 elections, however messy it has been, means the beginning of 2026 elections. And I think citizens need to engage with that process. Accreditation of observers 12 months before elections, and then general promotion of citizens' participation in elections as well as their governance. And all these functions, maybe to conclude, are functions that must be supervised by Parliament in accordance with Article 79 of our Constitution. And I hope Honorable Basalirwa will take our messages to Parliament.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Indeed, we have a new Parliament come May, and more numbers, if I may add, and a new opposition political party in Parliament as well. So probably let's look forward to a different Parliament that can claim its space. Thank you so much, Sarah Virete and Morrison Rakakamba, for being part of this conversation. Please, you can get back to let's give them a hand clap. We are halfway into the program, and I'm trying to fit within the time that I have remaining. We are going to have another presentation that now looks at something slightly different, but still in context: money. We can all agree that the 2021 elections were majorly characterized by two things. One, money. The second one was violence. So allow me to invite Kainda, Eddie, to make a short presentation that will look at the financing of political parties within context, and then we shall have another panel constituted to discuss.
hanging. Just a moment. Ayagala, come and put Ayagala. Don't know why it didn't come earlier.
Okay, as it connects, I must remind you that we are live on all the platforms of ACFIM and of PPI, Public Policy Institute. We're also live on Civic Space TV. So you can make your comments and we can be able to pick them.
Invited guests, members of the diplomatic corps, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Eddie Kainda, and on behalf of ACFIM, I'll be presenting to you yet another submission towards informing the country on the state of public financing of political parties in Uganda. The previous presenters have spoken much about political participation. Here at ACFIM, we do believe that political participation without effective financing of political parties could render our efforts not to the optimum. But also this has serious implications when it comes to the growth of the democratic processes in Uganda. And this presentation shall focus on that. The objectives of the presentation, among others, is to analyze the architecture of political financing that we do have in this country, but also to review the compliance of the PPO as amended 2005. For purposes of knowledge, PPO is the Political Party Financing and Political Organizations Act. We are happy that the key political parties that are represented in Parliament are represented in here, including JEMA, including DP, including UPC, and NRM. For purposes of knowledge, we know that this law was amended in 2010, but this law provided for financing of political parties that are active in Parliament. And the major reason was to identify ways on how we can provide for usage of government and public resources into political party financing, but also political party organizations. In the context of this, we know that money is a key prerequisite in the financing of political processes. And it is important and sustainable that if political organizations are not financed, then we have challenges in trying to determine how effective they can be in the political processes. They need to pay money for growing structures, field candidates, pay staff, among others, just like we shall see. But also sufficiently remain with a level of consent within themselves and to the level in which they determine their position on major political developments in the country. Now, we draw attention to Section 14A of the Political Parties and Political Organizations Act that guides us on how political parties and organizations should be financed. And it says, Section 14A indicates that we shall use government or public resources for political party financing. But specifically, and I quote, government shall contribute funds and other public resources towards the activities of political parties and organizations represented in Parliament in accordance to the following principles. Number one, registered political parties or organizations shall be funded by government under this act in respect to elections and their daily activities. And I want to quote the two words, in respect to elections and other day-to-day activities. That is Section A, 14A. Then 14B says that in respect to elections, government shall finance political organizations on equal basis, irrespective of whether you are NRM or DP or JEMA or UPC. For as long as you're participating in electoral processes, you ought to be financed on equal basis. Then Section C indicates that in respect to normal day-to-day activities, funding of political parties shall be based on numerical strength of the organization in Parliament. So if NRM has over 300 and many candidates, members of Parliament represented, therefore financing shall be represented based on that assertion. But there are issues that come into play. We notice that since the amendment was made, the actual implementation comes in about 5 years after the passing of the amendment. Now, the question is, why does it take so long to start financing key actors in a political process? If EC, Electoral Commission, and the Ministry of Finance Planning and Economic Development is supposed to do this, and it's supposed to be in control of developments, when and how does it ensure that they start implementing the recommendations that are made in the law? Could it be that they did not have the financial wherewithal to finance political parties? Or could it be that they did not determine the financing of political parties as a major issue in terms of political development? And in any case, why was the amendment made and it couldn't be implemented? Those are questions that we may ask. Just like I mentioned, could it have been a ploy that we do not finance political parties as a means of weakening parties in opposition, for example? It's good that we have political parties represented here, including JEMA, DP. We may have to get insight into that and identify how you're going on by this. Then, could it be that someone did not implement the law in place? And at what point do we ensure that there is command of the law? Why do we ensure that political parties probably are not financed, and we know that this could threaten their very existence as major political actors within the multi-party dispensation? Now, if you look at what happened in 2015, political parties during the election period were financed with about 10 billion shillings. And of course, like I said, these ought to have been appropriated according to equally during the electoral processes. But when you look at what happened in that very year, NRM took over 80% of this money. That's about 8 billion shillings. Followed by our very own Forum for Democratic Change taking about 1 billion shillings. Followed by DP taking about 400 million shillings. Then our very own UPC taking about 193 million shillings. Then our very own Mr. Basali of Jema takes a paltry 27 million shillings. If you are going by the provision of equal sharing within the political parties, where does this leave administration of the party? Probably Honorable Asuman will have to share his experiences on the same. What happens in 2021-2022 elections? 15 billion is assigned to political parties during the electoral period. Remember that the provisions say that we shall finance them during the elections on equal basis, and when we are looking at administration of the party in terms of daily expenses or running costs, we shall be financing them based on numerical strength. We all know that this money was allocated almost towards or in the middle of an election, but still the provision was disregarded. And this is what happened. NRM takes again 12 billion shillings in the same allocation procedure, followed by FDC at 1.5 billion, followed by DP at about 623 million shillings, UPC at 290. Then, as usual, my good friend comes in last at 41 million shillings. The distributive criteria suggests to be recurrent, that this has been done over the time. The occurrence of the behavior of the persons that are managing this, the allocation, but also the administration of these expenses comes into play. Why do we have a pervasive behavior that disregards what the law says? When do we have the command of the law, and the lawyers in the house must be able to defend us on this? When do we have the laws respected? What happens that the party, for example, in power takes the majority and probably leaves the rest of the parties to suffocate in terms of financing? In financial literacy, we call this financial suffocation. I imagine that my friend has been financially suffocated to operate. Denying political parties a fair share of the stake on the electoral table, including control of their consent in terms of what they should be doing, in terms of fielding candidates, in terms of managing their processes, but also in terms of how they conduct their campaign. If you look at what happened in the previous campaign time period, in the gazetted campaign period as advised by the Electoral Commission, I'm not aware of whether I saw consistency in the way political parties did their campaigns, other than seeing incidents and events where I would see their existence. Now, like I mentioned, if we know that all those the 15 billion was allocated during or towards elections, and the law says in respect to elections, government shall finance political organizations on equal basis, what does this mean to the political processes, but also to the growth and consistency or involvement of political organizations that are represented in parliament? And what does this imply? the omission, the commission, and the total disregard of the section is being used, and in according to our interpretation, being used to suffocate political parties in opposition. But also, we believe that somewhere, somehow, someone is not doing his work. Could it be that the EC that is presided over by a justice did not implement or interpret the law to effect it? When you follow up Mr. Biabakama's submissions, for example, you realize that in very rare cases did he make a pronouncement during the electoral period that was not guided by the law, and he would be vivid to indicate what does the law say. Could it be that this was an oversight? And why was it done then? Those are questions that we could be able to ask. Could it be that the law was disregarded? But lastly on this, what could it have been a deliberate attempt to suffocate the opposition during the electoral period and flatten their berries at the expense of the political parties involved into this? Those are questions that linger in people's minds. But most importantly, where were the political parties to claim their share? I recall at the same time of events that could have happened. During the IPOD summit that was done in May 19th, if we recall, IPOD recommended that the monies to political parties be raised to 15 billion to 35 billion shillings. But we recall that only 15 billion shillings was allocated, and later 2.5 to make it 17.5. But also we remember that ACFIM did a presser on 19th to raise red flags on the same and question adherence to the law in regard to elections. Then later, there was a lot of public outcry, but also media attention to the narrative over the same, and media was blowing this up as a dominant narrative. And we see the Minister of Finance succumbing to pressure and indicates to us that more money would be disbursed to the political parties. And later on, 2.5 is disbursed to the political parties. And the criteria was supposed to be on equal basis. You remember putting up a press publication like that. But also in the middle of the campaign, political parties, by then they were dry. Remember that this is the middle of the campaign, but the EC opts to hoard the money for parties that are dry. But let alone, this money is again released, but the sharing is again based on numerical strength, not equal basis. What could have happened again? These are issues that we may have to ask ourselves. But also in respect to the same, we know that Section 14D demands that political parties and political organizations shall be subjected to an audit by the Auditor General. We have been able to review some of the Auditor General's reports, and we note that, one, the reports are more of a statutory obligation than an accountability of money, of public money. Because we know that if government finances public organizations, including political organizations, this is public money, it must be subject to audit. And there's lack of openness in utilization of this money, as indicated in the statutory audits. A standard statutory audit procedure according to the financial reporting standards must work based on approved plans, approved budgets, approved expenditure based on activities, performance reports, standard accountability documents, for example, vouchers, invoices, among others, value for money, but most importantly, return on investment. Even when we take a proportion of the money that was given, can we say that we have gotten value? We have gotten return on investment. If we say that 15 billion or 35 billion in any case was allocated to political parties, if government did we see value in terms of what it did to the progression of democracy in Uganda? These are questions that we should ask. But also the capacity of political parties to account in terms of the weak financial management systems, but also the corruption that presupposes over the activities of these political parties. Now, as we conclude, we know that when parties are not financed, they shall always lack transparency in internal processes. You recall what happened during the pre-election time, especially when we had the political party primaries. Cannot field candidates. If a major political party cannot field candidates, then what is at stake in the political participation process? What could be, or what will happen when it cannot have running costs? But most importantly, where does it lie in terms of having strong political structures? If you take a case of what happened in those political parties during the elections. Then you talk about corruption in the parties, internal party conflicts, but also the issue of capture of parties by sponsors, especially when they are not financed by the state as it's supposed to be. So these and many other issues should trigger debate amongst the representative of political parties that are here, including NRM, DP, UPC, and JEMA, and tell us, how do you operate? If you are financially suffocated, what does it mean to you in terms of arranging your own internal houses, but also giving us meaningful participation on the political table? These and many other factors should be able to generate discussion in the next panel that we are going to have. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eddie Kainda, for setting the stage for the next panel of discussions, and quickly allow me to convene the panel. It should be a very interesting panel. Let me introduce Honorable Asman Basarira, the president for JEMA. He's also a lawyer. He's no stranger to such spaces. Neither a stranger to the space where we discuss democracy and governance. Honorable, please take your seat. You're most welcome. He is also the current and MP-elect for Bujiri municipality. Because we are discussing money, we shall also look at the other part of money in terms of spending if you're a candidate. So allow me also to welcome and also introduce Ms. Farida Nambi, sorry. She's the former parliamentary candidate for Kampala City Woman MP. I think she was the second. I don't like to use the word she lost. She was the runner-up. Yep, that's the word. Then also lastly, allow me to welcome Mr. Simon Obilan. Also is a former parliamentary candidate for Kumi County. Should I mention the position you took? Okay, I will hold that one. All right, and I'll also take my seat. let's get this conversation started because we must be done by 1. And I want to pick it up from where Eddie has left it, because he has painted the picture concerning the financing, public financing of political parties in relation to 2 clauses. The one that speaks to the day-to-day running of the political party, but there was also a clause that speaks to financing them in regard to election campaigns. And I know for a fact that Honorable Usman Basaira has been very active on this issue. Even when he was chairing the iPod, if I'm not mistaken, this issue was raised. So it's a conversation that has been ongoing for quite some time. And I will start with you. Because for 10 years, if I may count, of financing political parties, including the amendments that were made to incorporate the public financing of political parties, can we argue that political parties are now better off than they were before?
Well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that even if the money that Parliament appropriates to political parties is still very small, it is better than having nothing. And it is no in the sense that it's really peanuts. I'll give you an example of my own party, JEMA, that I lead. As the presenter did mention, the one who gave a lead discussion on this issue, Parliament appropriates 10 billion shillings. And that money, annually, that money is released to political parties on a quarterly basis, every after 3 months. And JEMA receives about 7 million in a quarter. That makes it about 30 million in a year. The annual budget of JEMA is approximately 750 million in a year. Now that means that parliamentary or government contribution to JEMA annually is about 4%, which really is very little money. And that means as a party, we must find ways of looking for resources to cater for the other 96%. But you also know the culture in this country. The culture of the wananchi supporting their political parties is very low, it's very poor, for basically 3 reasons. 1, we have not yet entrenched multipartyism in the country. Number 2, the political environment makes it extremely difficult for people to contribute to political parties. They fear to be, the repercussions. You find in other countries, the media, corporate societies come out to identify with political parties. In Uganda, try it today, tomorrow you'll be no more. The big businesses actually are comfortable identifying with government. That's why every election you'll find the Kwagalana group saying we are contributing this amount of money to the NRM campaign. They will not do it to JEMA, they will not do it to UPC or FDC. It becomes extremely difficult. Then NRM did a disservice to this country by giving free membership cards. If you want to become an NRM person, just walk to any of their parties and you get a free card. But you know, one of the major avenues of financing political parties is through sale of party cards. And we are challenged. When we want to sell our own cards, the wananchi will ask us, how come NRM is giving them to their members free of charge? It becomes a very big problem. And we cannot explain to the wananchi that the NRM is a state party. They have an extended hand into the treasury, so they can afford to give their members cards free of charge. So we cannot even raise money by sale of cards. Now, there is also another limitation in the law, Section 14A, that has been cited. You cannot get
more than 400 million shillings in a year from foreign sources. So there's also that limitation. Even if you went out mobilizing resources, there is a limitation. And again, the law places another limitation where you cannot get money from certain sources, governments, individuals, organizations
that are hostile.
that are deemed to be hostile. And the only positive aspect with it is that the minister has, through a statutory instrument, come to Parliament to notify the country which of these organizations or states or people are hostile to the country. So because of those limitations, it becomes extremely difficult for parties to operate. And if you ask any of our colleagues who are in these political parties, the parties are struggling. They are struggling, they are crippling. As a matter of fact, most of these political parties rely on the magnanimity of their leaders. There is no money. If even before I became an MP, if there are bills to pay at the GEMA headquarters in Mengo, I would get money from my law firm as the party president. Otherwise, you'll find there is no electricity, there is no water, there are staff to pay for. And it doesn't happen to me alone. If you went to Chairman Mao, he will tell you how he gets his small money from his small businesses to finance DP. The same goes to Noop or Ant and these others. Maybe it's only the NRM that is a bit comfortable, and you'll not find their leader, the sole visionary, dipping into his pocket, to finance activities of NRM part, as it were. So those are some of the challenges, and as I said, it is a yes and no answer, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, but I was looking at the some information. I think the NRM chairperson contributes his salary to the party. I didn't verify that though, but it is there in the records that he contributes his salary to the party. So he makes a contribution. But
of how much? Because we know his salary. At least his salary officially, we know it. How much does he contribute to the party?
But now I'll come back to that question. But now, Honorable, we have a law. But why is it that when it comes to the clause that speaks to financing political parties to participate in elections for campaigns, it has been disregarded? Is it an omission? Is it a commission? How do you explain this?
Probably you could be young.
He is.
Probably. Yes, you could be a young man. For us, we've been around for some time. You may not appreciate the history of this regime in relation to political parties. When the NRM came to power, the first thing they did was to ban parties. Legal notice number 1 of 1986, they banned the political parties.
And they opened them up.
Mr. Museveni and the NRM have never been believers in pluralism. So that explains some of the things you are talking about. When we eventually opened up in 2005, again, it was not out of conviction. Mr. Museveni is on record to have said, let's open up to the Bejeko. That's the statement he used. And those who have been around for some time know that I'm very accurate in that quotation. He said, to Bejeko, let's open up and he said he was tired of going out of the country, and each time he moved out of the country, he's being asked why he does not open up. So the opening up was not out of conviction. That's why even the laws related to the laws that would engender a multipartism are in themselves restrictive. You look at the Political Parties and Organizations Act. When did the provision on funding come about? Almost 10 years after we had become a multi-party, country. The first law in 2002 had no provision on funding. Even the one on 2005, the aspect on funding is a very recent development. And even then, even when the provision was included in our laws, the implementation came far much later. And it does not surprise you that even when the funding is there, the implementation aspect of it is problematic. The law is very clear. And when you look at elsewhere, countries across the globe, there are basically two models of funding. There is what we call the proportional model, which is practiced in Burundi, where parties money on equal basis. Then there is the equality model. No, the proportional model is on the basis of numerical strength. Equality model is regardless of how you perform in parliament. And then the hybrid. Countries like Tunisia and Mozambique are practicing the hybrid. Here, we don't know what we are. In Uganda, we don't know. Are we on a proportional model? Are we on equality model? Because when you look at the law,
By practice, it's proportion.
yes, by practice. But when you look at the law, in one instance, it talks about equality model. Then in another instance, it talks about proportional model. But you see, the equality model has never been implemented, even when it is in the law. Last year, towards election, we were in a meeting in Munyonyo. Dr. Suranda was there. I remember in a closed door session where I, Mr. Museveni, Honorable Akena, and Honorable Mao, the four of us were in a room, and we were discussing the issue of increased funding to political parties. And we agreed that these parties across border are struggling. Let's increase their funding. So we said it should move from 10 billion to 35 billion. And the money was included in the budget, about 20 billion. Somebody was mentioning it accurately. Now, they declined to release it to political parties. And as chairman of IPOD, I raised it on the floor.
Who declined?
Government.
In this case, who is government?
What do you want me to say? The executive.
Who in particular declined?
Let me say the executive arm of government.
Okay, that's fair.
Now, when I raised it on the floor, after 3 days, 15 billion was released. So it means maybe somebody wanted to swindle this money. Otherwise, money which we had appropriated in the budget, why wasn't it being released to political parties? When I raised it on the floor, they released 15 billion. Now, I got information that it was going to be distributed on the basis of numerical strength. I alerted the Secretary General of JEMA, who was by then leading the IPOD Council. They wrote, there's an official communication to the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, reminding him that this money has to be distributed on the basis of numerical strength. They even went and met him. I personally went to the Electoral Commission. I sat with the legal department, because these are colleagues I studied with in law school in Makerere. I showed them the law. When the money was released, I understand some officers of the NRM went to the Electoral Commission and disregarded that provision. I went back on the floor of the House and I said, look, you guys are openly violating the law. The Attorney General was not in the House that day. So he said, the Finance Minister said, we will consult the Attorney General. They came back and said, Basari was right.
Consulting them on the law.
On the law. The Finance Minister came on the floor of Parliament and said, Basari was right. We should have distributed this money on the basis on equality basis. Now, and I thought these guys had understood. Immediately after election, I think it was around the 17th, they released another 500 million, I think. It was distributed on the basis of numerical strength. Even after I had a meeting on the floor. That's why this time I was very bitter. I didn't go to IPOD. I wrote to the chairman. I said, you guys, the way you behave, you are taking us to appear as fools. We sit, agree, the law is very clear. You cannot even implement what we have agreed on, even basic things. So I am giving you that background to make you understand that the implementation of this law, I mean, the absence of proper and accurate implementation is because there is no political will. And there is no political will because the party in power is never a believer, has never believed in political pluralism. It has never believed in multipartyism. So, fortunately, about a month ago, I had a meeting with some of your colleagues in ACFIM, and we agreed we go to court. I don't know how far we have gone. We agreed we go to court on this matter.
First, stay that one. That shouldn't be discussed here.
No. If you don't go, others will go. So you don't have to say state. If you don't, because you see, you are not talking, the mistake you should not be making is to speak about, to fear to confront illegality. And so we should not talk about it. How?
No, no. The reason why I'm saying I don't know whether we should talk about it now or in the next question I was going to ask.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Maybe I thought you were cowardizing.
No. You are preempting my question.
There is a lot of fear and self-censorship these days.
Not with me. Not with me.
Okay, so I think I have tried to address your issue.
You've really tried to address the question. And I have questions which I'll come back to later. Probably they will go to other political parties in here that are not NRM. Because until now, I don't understand why you're the only person making noise on the disregard of the law, yet they are also victimized. So I'll be talking to UPC and DPO on that matter. But let me slightly move away from that, and then I come to my good friend, Miss Farida Nambi.
Yes.
I understand you contested Kampala Central.
Yes, I did.
Woman MP.
Yes.
And you became the runner-up.
Yes.
To put it lightly. First of all, help me understand, because you stood on the ticket of NRM.
Yes.
A well-resourced party,
Yes.
meaning finances were not necessarily your problem. And in ACFIM, we've done an extensive study that has qualified that when you have money, you are close, if not already, an MP. What went wrong?
Good morning. Actually, good afternoon to the audience here. I would like to, first of all, thank, because of what he has mentioned, to thank everybody here who voted for me in this election. I am very grateful for the many votes that I received and your confidence in me. Having said that, I was told to speak about money and the 2021 general elections and how that affected us as participants. Yes, I'm the NRM flag bearer for Kampala Women MP seat 2021. And I would like to start with a saying that a political philosopher came up with called Cindy Lauper, that money changes everything. We all affirm in this hall, plus the Honorable Member of Parliament, Suman Basalira, that money is essential to campaign spending. There are items that we need to spend on. And having said that, then that brings another question of, does money truly equate to political success?
Good question.
Yeah. So I want to tell you that we received financial contributions from our parties as participants. And
how much was it?
It was about 50 million shillings.
Okay.
And if you ask me as a candidate with 9 constituencies, whether, I don't know, he said 4%, I don't know what percentage I would be on, because with each constituency, the list should be about 200 million spent in a constituency. We went into these elections and there were emerging issues that I would like to raise on this platform for purposes of promoting our democratic processes in Uganda. The first was civic education on what is the mandate of an MP, already existing mandates of MPs. You go to constituencies and you're expected to immediately solve solve people's problems. If you find that they have not yet, they are doubting about the lunch they will eat, or even if the lunch is there, they say these are beans, and since you are an NRM, probably you can afford a kilo of meat. Now, we are faced with a lack of understanding, I guess, with what the mandate of an existing or an emerging candidate for MP seat should bear in our electorate. So that is an issue I wanted to raise for purposes, and it serves to be also a recommendation. But also, I would like to assert that money is very crucial. People would vote you for instance, a good ad, a beautiful poster. There are things that are essential with money. So we need to understand as a country that money is essential to campaign spending, and that is a full stop. Whether that transforms into votes is another area that we need to think about. My observation, though, was that in this campaign, incumbents, challengers, us that came in as challengers or newcomers, spent more than people like Honorable Basaria, who can have name recognition, for instance. Even media is, for instance, booking them early for shows and all that. But if you're a newcomer, or a challenger over an incumbent, you're faced with so much campaign spending needs than an incumbent. And these are observations that I would like to relay to the audience here, and for my recommendations. The other issue is that the candidate who spends more is not necessarily the winner.
So there are other factors.
So there are other factors. There are other factors like the euphoria a gentleman spoke of, the euphoria for change, and it could be like poster is beautiful. It could be different reasons that people come out to really vote, other than the money factor. The effects on us participants is of course there is huge indebtedness. Many of us and our colleagues have lost properties to money sharks or banks over this election. So people are quite traumatized. Post-election, there's a lot of trauma among our members. We'd also want to recommend an increase of political party funding, yeah. And in my case, when you look at NRM, it has the largest number of MPs in the House already. So even when you give it 8 billion, because somebody told us that they got 8 billion, but when that is broken down, I think that's why we get only 50 million. Some of us that have 9 constituencies. So I want to assert that probably political parties, that review of the electoral laws regarding increase of funds, and maybe best and to candidates, cascading down to candidates based on how many constituencies you have, it would also serve to help us. So it's not true that us who were on NRM
You
fundraised as a candidate. So it hugely actually depended on that, because I don't even know, even if you had one constituency, that 50 million is enough for you. You understand?
Okay.
It will take a very small percentage. So those are the effects and some of the recommendations that I can come up with. Of course, expenses fall in promotional materials, advertising, but that does not guarantee a win.
Are we?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You raised a couple of interesting issues here. One, and I'm going to come back to the effects, and when I am discussing effects, I'll turn to Oberlin. But one of the things you've raised, which I need to collaborate is the issue to do with newcomers spending more than incumbents. I think in some places I was seeing incumbents spending more than newcomers because there is something called the sympathy vote of a newcomer. Usually that plays out. But I think we shall have a discussion around that. And also, I've been doing my quick mathematics here. You said you needed about 200 million per constituency, right?
Yes.
You are talking about 9 constituencies. So you needed about 1.8 billion.
Yes.
So are you saying partly you lost because also the money was not enough?
First of all, I count myself as a very blessed human being because I know that truthfully, I got support from not only NRMs, but also people that have seen me for these so many years do some initiatives that they believe in. So I actually don't take it that I lost. There are other factors that are not for this platform,
okay,
basically to discuss.
I smell a court case here.
So, to me, those huge votes, those many votes were, they reaffirmed my support in Kampala.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Let me turn to Simon Oberlin. You contested for Kumi County. And I was following your story. It's quite touching, but for purposes of people understanding, because I've never understood why someone picks 500 million and runs to politics and then ends up with nothing. So, and then you find others saying, I'll contest again come 2021, even after being bruised. Paint a picture for someone out there to understand when people talk about that I lost an election, what do you lose in real terms? Because I think it's beyond just losing an election bid. You lose much more. She partly touches things to do with being indebted and all that, and I'll also come back to her, but in your case, your situation. Paint a picture of this person.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eddie, for an opportunity. Felix, sorry, for an opportunity that you've given me. Good afternoon, members who are in here. Maybe for the people who have met me for the first time, my name is Obilan Simon Peter. I contested for Kumi County MP seat. And I should also say I did not lose the seat.
Okay.
The votes were not enough. I was number 3.
I like that.
I was
Fair
number 3. So I should not say I lost it. Yeah. You have asked me to paint a picture on what losing an election is. Indeed, I want to say losing an elective seat is more than just the words that people always talk about here. It has a lot of negativity that you come to go through. And personally, I have gone through it. There are very many things that people look at on the positive side when you're coming for these elective positions, but you do not see what will come when you lose the seat. So I wanted to say that indeed I lost the 2021 seat, but it is so painful. And sometimes I sit down and I say, maybe if I would get somebody who has not yet attempted politics, they should not come for politics. And yet at the same time, we need leaders. You will not have President Museveni rule Uganda forever. We will need another President Yoweri Museveni. We will not have a president of Jema on that seat forever. We will need another person who is going to replace him. But how will these people be able to join in if there is no proper way in which they can come in? Losing an election, to me, I would say, Eddie, you lose everything. You lose your dignity, you lose friends, you lose your senses, you lose friendship. During this election, I lost my own home. During the 2021 elections, I have lost literally all the friends because everyone has lent you money, has contributed towards your.
When you say you
campaign.
lost the home, what do you exactly mean? As in you mortgaged your home?
Yeah, I had a house that I was trying to build for the 34 years that I've lived on earth. But when the politics reached the climax, of course, there was hope that, yes, I am at the optimum point. So I am sure if this went, I would be able to recover at a later stage. But yes, I had to mortgage the house to get some money to finish the race, but it all went down. So I lost my home in that process. And not only the home, I lost very many things. I lost cars, I lost businesses, and there's a lot that I cannot mention. So that is what it means by really losing an election. You lose almost everything. It really takes time for you to get back to the road and pick up again. And yet your heart is like, but I need to be there. So you lose completely. That is what I should say.
Okay. So are you saying that you would have been number one if you had more money to contest? Because when we come to my dear friend here, there were other factors that played against her. But for you, is it because you never had enough money for you to really contest against the person who won?
Yeah, I should say that, yeah, I should have been to parliament by now if I had enough money. Because if you looked at all the 7 candidates who contested with me, right from NRM candidate, FDC, Gemma was not there, DP, NUP, all these candidates to me looked weak, however much they had the money. They did not have knowledge about the problems that the people in Kumi had. I was in Kumi, I was raised in Kumi, I studied there, I lived there, so I knew what the people really wanted. But because some of these people had accumulated money, they have worked in government for long, like the NRM candidate was in government for the last 35 years, and is in a higher position, accumulating money and working. By the time he came, he was the action man. You would go to the voters, and they say, Honorable, we need this road worked on. And the following day, the grader is coming to work on the road. He would go for burial and is offering 500,000 as his condolence. Now, what do you do who has been there, but you do not have the money to help the people? These people are poor. So if I had the money, I would be in parliament.
Wow, interesting. So you are confirming that money actually wins you a seat?
Yeah, you need to have money in politics. You can never deceive me that you will go to parliament without money. For example, spending in elective positions currently in Uganda begins right from the day a candidate is voted. Like right now, as we speak here, people are already campaigning for 2026. Everybody that, everybody, yeah, every person that dies right now as we speak, in my place, a person who is aspiring for 2026 is sending a contribution, is participating. You can imagine we have taken politics to a level where you have to ferry water in a burial place, a candidate. You have to transport people to take them to attend the burial. You have to go and pick the body, if possible, from the hospital or wherever the person has died to take to the burial ground. You have to bring chairs, you have to buy posho and beans. That is the level where politics has reached. So if you do not have money to do that, then you will not be among the top 3.
That is even to be among the top 3?
Yes, among the 3 or 2 or 1.
Okay,
exactly.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to Honorable Saira, but before I come back to Honorable Saira, you talked about, you also had effects of being number 2. I don't know whether you have the similar story my good friend Bilan is sharing. What did you lose? Although you say you never lost, but...
I lost money. I spent a lot of money.
Can you put a figure?
I would rather withhold that.
Okay.
But I spent quite a lot of money, you can imagine, participating in 5 divisions of Kampala. That's Kawempe, Makindye, Rubaga, Central, and Nakawa. And in that, we established teams which are paid for a period of about 8 months on a payroll, several people to participate for you at village level, at parish level, and at division level, and at now the district executive. So we have people we employ that help us to manage this election, and that takes a toll of money. So what I want to tell my fellow Ugandans and the people that are watching us online is that money is essential to an election. It has to be, is it indispensable to an election process? That's what it is. You need to, because money determines who can run. Money determines who can run. And for political party leaders that are here, I want to tell you that because of the fact that money determines who can run, you need to look at a way of raising more resources to vet, to orient or train capable leaders and field them to help Uganda democratic or people, the right people to fill the right spaces. Because if you don't have like 1 billion plus shillings, you can't run for Kampala Woman MP.
Wait a minute.
You really can't.
You are saying the minimum figure is 1 billion plus to contest.
Because you have Nakawa East and you have Nakawa West. And I'm telling you, you have a team of people that are going to be permanently employed to you, to help you. And now I affirm what my colleague has said, that you have to we are expected to be present in terms of to give financial support on burials, on weddings, anything. You know? So that is what we've found, that this is the political arena.
That is what you found our good friends, Honorable Basalirwa, and I'm seeing Gerald Karanga here, they had put in place.
Yes, I don't know how they put it in place, but I think they can highlight more. But that's the reality of what you face. That's what electorates expect. It's an issue probably of lack of economic empowerment or poverty, but also I think ignorance of what to expect from an MP. You leave an election and you really want solitude. You want to hide away from everybody, otherwise your brain is about to burst because of the high level of expectations that have been accustomed to you for a whole long period of time. So, but my issue on my recommendation, actually, I would like to bring it here on the issue is that money, this individual or group spending or party spending should be limited to campaign essentials. And we should have standards in the review of our electoral laws. We should have standards and early civic education. Because frankly, when you have early money, for instance, early money would mean money that you've got before primaries. Your campaign would be steady. The way you move would be very, 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 very fast. Other than this person gambling, today they have money and tomorrow they have to sell their house. So people who have fundraised before have a higher chance of winning an election. But I also experienced the issue of the type of candidate and the responsiveness of the electorate. If I go into Kawempe North as an NRM, I'm expected to spend not below certain kind of monies. If it's opposition, probably they can leave.
They sympathize with the opposition.
We were witch hunted by just being an NRM standing in Kampala. I'm like,
because they know you have the money.
You'll be like, you have not spent as an NRM. So like,
okay.
They gave 10,000, you can't give 10,000. So but also within the opposition in Kampala, for instance, they also suffered. If you are a certain opposition candidate, probably you'd pass. But if you are another in Kampala, this time what we experienced, you'd have to also spend. So spending is central. But what I mean, we need a standard and a review in the electoral laws on what are the essentials to spend on during a campaign. And Electoral Commission should help us, plus Parliament, to really give some kind of civic education to the electorate, because in Kampala, coming as an NRM candidate, you can really be chewed. Literally chewed.
Okay.
They really, yeah.
Thank you. I'm now coming back to you, Honorable. Political party funding could probably answer some of the challenges we are discussing right here. For example, if we really had a functional political parties that have enough resources to finance candidates very well, then they can compete and be able to meet some of those new emerging public expectations of voters. I know for a fact that even with the law in place, there are challenges of enforcement. When I looked at the statistics which I have here, is that you have, for example, we have over 2,000 MPs nominated and participating, but half of that number renders independence. There's something to do with the internal political party challenges that force members to prefer to contest as independents, including mobilizing their own resources, not necessarily relying on the resources coming from the party. What is the future of the funding of political parties using public resources in the current context, and how can we improve this?
Well, first of all, I don't know why, and I'm sorry, I don't know why you like living in pretense and denial.
Okay, get me out of there.
You allude to the fact that there are many independents. Do you know what it means to be a flag bearer of an opposition party in this country? Do you know what it means? For a person out there to take a decision to say I'm contesting on the ticket of an opposition party in this country, you don't know what it means.
What does it mean, Honorable?
Because it is virtually criminal to be opposition in this country. People have lost opportunities. People have lost jobs. I was university secretary at IUIU, Islamic University, in 2008. When I went to contest, they said, but there was pressure from government to kick me out of that university. I just resigned and went away. And you think these many young people, young men and women can take the sacrifices some of us are taking? It's not easy. So it's understandable. The environment is very restrictive. The environment is very prescriptive. You just don't understand what it is. So I don't want us to live in denial.
Okay.
That's one. Number two, the funding of political parties will not be a panacea to the issues they are raising. I have argued elsewhere that the voters, the wananchi, have a lot of demands on those who are contesting for the simple reason that there is a breakdown of social services and infrastructure. Now, are you going to address that by giving more money to political parties? No. You are going to address that by, in my view, giving more money and empowering local governments to do more on the ground. You find, and some MPs get tempted. You go very deep in villages with very poor roads, and an MP is standing on a platform and promising to make a road, which is really outside their mandate. But that's the language that will resonate with the voters. So you are tempted. And I used to quarrel, positive quarreling, don't the negative. I used to quarrel with colleagues I would contest with, who would make such promises. And as a result, I was very unpopular. By the way, I stood for MP for 4 times. I only went through the 5th time. Yes. The first time I contested for MP was 2001. I don't know where you were. In 2001.
I voted. That one I can guarantee I voted.
In 2001, and I was a student. I was still, actually, I was guild president at Makerere. Then I went to stand for youth MP in Eastern Region. And you know how many votes I got?
How many?
I got 1 vote. Wow. The first time, no, it was not even mine because you didn't vote yourself. No, I was not a voter in their electoral college.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I was not a voter. Obviously, everybody claimed to have voted me. So in 2001, I got one vote. And I was, at that time, I was a third year law student at Makerere. 2006, I went back. I was followed. I went back in 2011, went back in 2016. I only came to parliament in 2018 through a by-election. Then recently in 2021. Now, if you came to Bujiri and Gerard Siranda was there campaigning for me in the by-election, and my brother from UPC, they were there. If you went to Bujiri, they will tell you, Basari was elitist. He's a Kampala politician. He does not, because I refused, I declined to fall into the trap of populist politics. I'll construct a road, is it what? I said no. And that explains why my failure rate was very high. But I have never changed
your strategy.
No, I've never changed. So, in my view, the solution could only lie in two things. One, empowering local governments, financial and administrative empowerment, because they are the closest to the people. If they are empowered, they have enough money, enough resources to do the infrastructure that will save these demands. Number two is economic and financial empowerment programs to the individuals themselves. You know, these capital programs like Emyoga, Entandikwa, if they are not politicized, if they are managed well, they would help to revamp the economic lives of the Wananchi. So that when you are going there, my young brother from Kumi, who is talking about, barriers, why should anybody who has lost a dear one think their redemption lies in an MP? Why? It's because of the poverty out there. So this funding you are talking about, in my view, will not be a solution. In 2000, I went to Lusaka and I had a very long discussion with we were a team of students from here. We went to Lusaka and met Dr. Bote. And one of the things he was telling us when we were in Lusaka, I liked multipartism of those days. He was sharing experiences that in their time, if UPC was to have a function, let's say in Kabale, the UPC leadership in Kabale and Wananchi would arrange everything where there would be somebody to provide accommodation, feeding, the tents, the public address system. That was it then. These days it is the reverse. If JEMA is to have a function in Kabale, the headquarters must provide from water to everything. Things have completely changed. So that structure, in my view, will be changed if we empower the Wananchi, economic empowerment, if we empower local governments, so that people don't look at politicians as redeemers. The other day, if you read about it some time back, the Observer wrote a read story, and they put my big head on that story, headline. It is difficult to be an MP, something like that. The headline was along those lines. The Observer journalist was writing a story about MPs and their lives, and how we spend and the things we spend on. I told him I'll not waste my time. Get my phone. So I surrendered my phone to him. It was a Saturday around midday. And we agreed he would return it to me on Sunday at around midday. And I told him, you be the MP of Bujiri municipality. Each call which comes, you do what? You pick and answer. And just listen. And he had his notebook. And And he went away because he found me in Buziga, I was going to play football. So he went with my phone. Said, please answer every call.
For the weekend.
For the weekend. This man, Vate, it's called Vate of the Observer. He returned my phone around the 10 p.m. in the night of Saturday. He just couldn't withstand the number of calls and the demands. He just could not. Honorable tufirirwa wano twenda kunziko. Honorable mwana wange mulwaire tukwenda kuti. Honorable nasuzendala tukwenda all sorts of things. Then he wrote, it was a real story. I met Minister Ephraim Kamuntu. He read that story and said, you've really summarized what we go through. I didn't know that it was universal. Now, that's the life of an MP. Why are we in that situation? Politics created by the NRM. Because that structure, that environment, that economic disempowerment is a creation of the NRM. These were not things of long ago, no. That's why in every election, these NRM people will tell you, every village is given 300,000 shillings. I remember we challenged it when I was arguing the Mama Mbaba's petition in 2016. We challenged it. We said, this is bribery. They said, no, it is facilitation.
Facilitation, they call it.
But we challenged it. 300,000. How many villages are there? So, this is the dilemma we find ourselves into. And in my view, we can only extricate ourselves from that dilemma if we address issues to do with the income of the wananchi and then the local government.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Our time is fast spent, but this conversation is just getting interesting. I would want to give my Oberlin and your parting shots in 1 minute. Your parting shots in 1 minute.
Yes, thank you once again. Now, I wanted to first of all make this clear to whoever is aspiring, maybe tomorrow to come up and say, I want to go for politics, elective politics. From the other part of it, it looks lucrative and enjoyable, but it is something that, if I may copy from what Honorable Basalura has said, that you go through what you did not expect. As we speak right now, I sit down and I wonder whether I will be able to go back for 2026 race. And yet, to me, I feel I have invested in, because 260 million plus that I have put in, it pains me. And yet at the same time, you are like, what if it happens again the same way? So the message to the aspiring candidates is elective politics is not easy, but we need to be there. I am calling upon the civil society organizations. I saw very many of them around, and the electoral commission, people who are in charge of politics, and then stakeholders who are interested in democracy of this country, that there's a lot of work that you need to do right from the beginning, like from today, actually yesterday, that you need to do for the people who are out there. So that maybe upcoming politicians and the incumbents will rest. You have just heard the Honorable Basali was saying that from morning up to maybe night, midnight, you're receiving calls every day. It is true, that is what happens there. So my take on this is politics is not easy. I should say that.
Okay. Ms. Farid, and what are your parting shots?
I would like to highlight the issue of countering private campaign funding with public campaign funding. I mean, that issue I think it should be Parliament to look at the public funds, campaign funds, versus how those fall in the hands of private individuals, how private individuals use money that is public in campaigns. That's something that we have to look into. I'd also want to request Honorable Basalira that the issue of political parties further supporting candidates, their their candidates is very crucial in helping us getting capable leaders in the right spaces and the good orientation of these leaders as we aspire to run under their political parties. I feel that more support, more orientation, more training would help us in the process, democratic process of this country, if they are better funded and they have strength as political parties. I want to lastly say that money is indispensable in a campaign. This is what Ugandans should know. And like just in the US, though it's a bigger democratic country, it has had many years of democracy. Just to win a House seat in like 2016, it would cost someone 1.5 million US dollars. So money has some essential requirements in a campaign, and that we must know. But that now the review of the standard of what is supposed to be spent on, and now the weight of our political parties coming in versus the number of constituents is also a very key thing that will make us more competitive in the races. I thank you.
Thank you.
Felix, just one thing I forgot. Yeah, I would also request that government, just like the way it has provided support for political parties, should also in one way look at the post-election effect on those who have lost. Because, yeah, there are very many people who are quiet, but they are going through a lot. By the way, if you are not careful, somebody can run mad. People have lost marriages. Your wife will sit down and say, but you man, you're not serious. And yet in you, you were like, let me attempt this. Maybe you never know, life will be better at the end of the day. So there is need for government to sit down and see how people who have gone through election can either be given something to start, or in one way or the other supported. It might not be financially, but psychologically, some of these people need to be approached. And then also, I would push this to Electoral Commission. If we would revise the way people politic or campaign on the ground, this would also help. Like, for example, a platform like this, if we would have it when we are campaigning, it would be better, where all candidates go and meet voters of a specific, for example, a county, one day, and none of you should go back there separately. It would also try to reduce on the expenditure. Because if we say, Simon, be here today, Ntambi, be the other side the other day. When I walk there, I have no manifesto. What do? Line up 10,000 shillings. You get? So a platform like this would help candidates debate, and voters will be able to see that, yes, this man is able, this man is not able. And at the end of the day, a merit is given, a vote is given to somebody on merit. Thank you very much.
Okay, our time is really fast.
Since he interjected in my submission, I would like to address the President, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, to really offer a relief package to some of the candidates that we know, we are not going to list them now, who lost and need his support.
At this rate, even us voters are going to ask for a relief package. But the very last parting shot from Honorable, and I want you to comment on the proposal to, when it comes to political party members who leave their parties in the final year towards the elections. Why isn't it possible that we probably consider, for example, like my colleague who moved to ANT, that now ANT becomes the beneficiary of that money that is appropriated on numerical strength? Quick comment on that one as your parting shot.
It needs an amendment to the law. By the way, I'm considering sponsoring a private member's bill to the Political Parties and Organizations Act. To clarify, first of all, on that issue of numerical strength versus final year, give it more clarity, but also to address the issue you raise, where in the final year people are moving because the Constitution allows it, but then when money comes, maybe it goes to, because as of now, the law is very silent on it. And you can sympathize with the implementers because the budgeting process these days, according to the Public Finance Management Act, the budgeting process changed completely. So the processes begin far much earlier. By the time we come to Parliament and there is a reading of a budget, it's really more of a ritual when the processes will have been concluded. So sometimes the shifting from one place to another or may not easily be catered for in the budget. And I think we need some clarity on that aspect of the law because it's silent. And I know it has raised a lot of concern and discussion. To those who are leaving their parties, going to other parties, they think the funding should move with them. But then those where they are coming from says, we are the people who sponsored you. We invested in you. Even if we didn't give you money, we gave you a platform. That is also an investment because there are people who may not easily go through if they don't carry platforms of certain parties. So there is still a discussion, and I think it's a gray area that requires legislative attention, in my view.
Well, thank you so much. That brings close to this panel of discussion. I will extend for just 5 minutes because I posed the question to other parties that I don't see them making noise on the issue concerning that money that should be shared equally, that is appropriated by government during elections. So I need someone from DP in 2 seconds. I think Saranda, you have to comment on that one, please. And I'm also seeing someone from UPC. So I am closing this in 5 minutes, but I need to understand, for purposes of benefiting everybody here, why are other parties silent on the matter? Thank you, Dr. Gerald Saranda.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and thank you so much for the audience that is here and our viewers out there. My name is Gerald Black Siranda, Lucas Senior. I am the Secretary General of the Democratic Party by the grace of God. I want to appreciate you for this opportunity. First, to correct you, this is not the show of Jema or Honorable Basman. He was speaking in the capacity of the chairman of the iPod Council then.
Okay.
In the iPod platform, our leader and official spokesperson is the sitting party. But what they speak is a contribution of all of us as a platform. And you may know that the fights to get multi-party dispensation, if you want to own, the DP championed it through Kawanga Semogerere, Zakaro Lum, and Reina Kafire. We just don't want to own processes. It's a process of Ugandans. And me and the comrade Fred Kasaija led the process of going to challenge the Electoral Commission. We went to Minister of Finance, and everything was under Deputy SG for UPC. Okay. We move as a team, and all of us are challenging this process because it's impunity. It's just proper impunity. In Uganda, we are driving a vehicle painted multi-party dispensation with UPC, with JEMA, with FDC, with NRM. You now have you have ANT, you have all parties, 27 of them. But the gears that are being engaged are a single party. The NRM gears are the ones that are being engaged in a vehicle painted multi-party dispensation. The question is the political goodwill and fight this impunity. The party in power has a role to play in making sure that our multi-party dispensation moves in the direction where we're going. And I believe that this is a process that we must champion as Ugandans, and we're not going to keep quiet because the process of electioneering, after the other 2021 general election, the process has begun. We did a petition to the Speaker as well of these processes, We own the process of a court option because we're not going to fold our hands as we let this happen. The law is very clear, and this unchristianity is unchristian, anti-religious, if you want to take that line. The question on how the funding, this public funding, we are not beggars. It's Ugandans that have taken charge to grow our multi-party dispensation. It's the role of Ugandans. This is not only being done here. When you look at across the globe and even where we pick this multi-party dispensation, the parties are funded to grow so that they prepare leaders. This funding is to help not only finance and support you to prepare the sessions, to prepare the candidates. We do campaign schools to move all across so that we get a better person designed to present before Ugandans to take a lead of this process. So it's our own initiative, but also call upon you and appreciate ACFIM for doing this role, but to call upon you to also continue these processes all across, not only within this position, but move all across, because the question of money and elections is a question that we need to understand the serious study. Finally, to make a comment on your question, when we go into multi-party dispensation, it's not only within Uganda. We borrow from other countries. And I think Honorable Basman has attempted to answer this question well. If in Zimbabwe, if you want to cross from your party, you go back to elections. You cross, I feel it is even unfair to allow a person that ran as DP in the last election say you can now change. You went to the voters. As a Democratic Party, if that's what you want, you go back to the voters. It is being done in Zimbabwe, it is done in Kenya, it is done everywhere where there is multi-party dispensation. So we cannot have a special position as Uganda. I also think it's also unfair in a multi-party dispensation to have a room for independence. It doesn't. It distorts the question of multi-party dispensation. And the answer to reduce money in elections, I've told Henry Muguzi here, is a proportional representation. We have to change the system in Uganda where winner takes it all to go to PR. PR will reduce the money. It is not going to be Honorable Basman. It is the party. It also assures you of quality. The party would have put Gerard Karuhanga, Honorable, on top as on their list. So they are not looking for Karuhanga. They're looking for the policies of the party. The money is not Ivan Bowe. No, it is to your party. So it is better and timely that we cross-check and give proportional representation a chance. It is being done that votes will not be wasted. Everybody will have an opportunity. In South Africa, there is also every party almost is represented. So proportional representation will assure you of quality. It will also reduce the question of the money, and the policies now will be challenged. Not step on the table, dance around, and you're voted. That's where we are heading today. And you don't expect anything if elections and the candidates continue being the way as it is. We're actually going to expect the worst in the coming
Thank you.
leaders.
Thank you so much. Quickly, my colleague Osinde, can you make sure the comments are under 3 minutes? I want to close this. I've overshot.
Thank you very much, Ndugu. 3 minutes. One, I want to thank the ACFIM for very timely like this, and associate with the Comrade Basadra in all the statements you have made as UPC. I am Michael Racho Sinde, my cabinet member, and I came here also as a capacity of the chairman, National Consultative Forum, as a legal committee chairperson. And therefore, I wish to associate myself in those two capacities with the statement Honorable Basar has made. But a quick one, my comrade Morris made a statement here that the government normally allies with the UPs. I just want to make a clarification that when you look at, yes, I just want to make a clarification here. Yeah. When you look at Section 18 of the Political Parties and Organizations Act, it clearly sets out aspects on how we ally, you do a merger and a collusion. And therefore, none of the three applies to UPC. However, I would share with my brother Maurice that at times we engage NRM, not an alliance, because the case study is that in Lira East, where Honorable Kena contested, there was a strong major called Major Awich, who almost took the thing from Akena. Now, if there was an alliance, why couldn't they give just Akena a free flatter? That position is not there. Secondly, my brother Emmanuel from PP said that UPC this time lost 2. I wish to correct that record, that we had 7 members of parliament previously, and this time around we have 9. So we have, as UPC, improved. I think that is important to.
So there is return on investment.
Yeah, to correct that. However, my point therefore, in association with the way forward that Honorable Baswara said about the local government funding them, our position as UPC would also be that there is need to change the mindset of the voters through civic education. The mindset is such that when a season of campaign comes, you find those campaign managers positioning themselves to make money from the candidates. And they can do that. They can do that for even 3 or so. When you are not there, he's also attending burial for and on behalf of the other party. When you are there, he's also managing the other one. And you find that that opportunity is for them to make money. The mindset is to make money, as opposed to having credible. That's why we have any person who gets money can become a member of parliament, not the cream, not the people who are supposed to be in parliament. And circumstantially, people are arguing the 6th, the 7th parliament. You will appreciate that during the UPC time, that parliament was a parliament of people who had credit. They come for the country. Now, anybody, and I'm very sorry, anybody who gets money can simply become a member of parliament. People don't care about issues. Osinde, you talk well, he's a very good lawyer, but he's poor. He cannot afford to pay. So that's the challenge. The last one, Mr. Brother, is that there is something that opposition is missing. Within us in the opposition, the component of tolerance is dwindling. A member from DP and NUP or UPC may not tolerate and even think of engaging his colleague after disagreement. But there is a very smart person here, the president of Uganda. Even when you have disagreed, he has courtesy to call again you to say, can we talk even if we don't agree? Something that we in opposition fail. President Museveni engages. Even when you have disagreed, he calls you and again talk to you, he calls you and talk to you. Why can President Museveni be smarter than us, opposition, in terms of engaging people who we disagree with? So, Mr. Basaldora, Honorable Basaldora, the formula, therefore, much as I agree with you, is that we have to engage further, even when we disagree. We have to engage further. We have to dialogue further in areas where we disagree. The numerical strength formula, that model, we disagree with it. But running away from dialogue may not assist. We need to engage further and dialogue further so that we create an environment of that peaceful coexistence. We need each other. We disagree to agree. When we disagree, you don't run away. Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm really running out of time. Allow me to invite the chairperson of ACFIM to close this meeting so that we can call it a day. I invite you, Mr. Chairperson, Treasurer, to come and close the meeting. No, time.
Thank you, Felix. Dear colleagues, on behalf of ACFIM and PPI, I want to thank our panelists today. Thank everybody who has participated in this space. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Our former candidates, thank you so much. Our fellow Ugandans, this is a discussion that cannot end, though very, very important. This should be just a springboard for each one of us here to continue with this discussion in different spaces to find practical solutions to these very, very challenging democratic deficits that we have in our country. We all agree that we want a democratic Uganda. We want to prosper as a democracy, but we all appreciate that there are very clear deficits. And we're not going to borrow anybody from outside this country to take care of this. It is our Lubimbi. We must go about it. We must engage. We must continue finding ways of solving this problem. Let's continue with the dialogues in different spaces. Ladies and gentlemen, friends in the media, let's also try to shape the discussions in the right discussion, in the right direction, because people actually trust you. When you start a debate, yeah, people will follow. But sometimes it depends what kind of question do you put across. It will determine the kind of responses. So let all of us as Ugandans embrace the challenges at hand and let each one of us play our part. I thank you so much and may God bless you.
Thank you. The meeting is closed. We've shot our time. That's why we never had Thank you so much.
All right. Some administrative announcements. We've got for you lunch, so please, there is a lady there.